Hello, I'd like to call to order the November 28th, 2017 Shelburne Select Board meeting. I'm sorry we're a couple minutes late. We had a little technical problems with a telephone here, trying to get Colleen in by phone, but there was some kind of issue. First item is to consider approval of the agenda. Joe, did you have anything changes?
19, I don't have anything for 2. I don't think there's any reason for the board to discuss that in executive session.
Okay.
And, I mean, I don't have anything for agenda item 12 for executive session. I don't know if the board does, though.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
He said he didn't have anything for 12.
Sorry, for 19, there shows an executive session that relates to agenda item number 12.
So just the executive session.
Right, I mean,
Okay.
unless the board has something, I don't have anything
I
for that.
don't. Does anybody on the board? Okay. All right, thanks. Anything else for anybody?
I don't have, just a comment that I had made a request to add the issue about the Ethics Committee funding to the agenda, but we received a note from the Ethics Committee saying they will discuss that tomorrow at their meeting, and so I'll withdraw that request until I hear from them.
Okay. Colleen's trying to call in.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get this out.
Need a motion to approve as
Yeah,
amended?
can someone make a motion to approve as?
So moved?
Moved by Jerry,
Second.
seconded by Jamie. Any discussion, anybody? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, next item is to consider approving the minutes of the October 24th and November 15th. Let's do them one at a time, please. October 24th, does anyone have any comments?
Joe mentioned that there was something about reviewing the tape. I'm not sure if anybody has done that.
Yeah, I'm fine with it the way it reads. Everybody fine with it?
I'll abstain, I wasn't in the meeting,
Yeah,
so for
okay.
that.
I don't remember what the issue was, so.
Okay, so someone want to move to approve the minutes of October 24th?
So moved?
Moved by Jerry,
Second?
seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. And we have an abstention with Jamie. I just say that so the person taking the minutes who's just listening to a tape knows.
Got it.
All right, next item is approve the minutes of November 14th. Anybody have any suggestions,
Yeah.
changes they'd like to make?
I would like to postpone that until the next meeting. We just emailed them today, and I was having server issues, and it wouldn't download them, so I haven't had a chance to review them.
Okay, you guys good with waiting?
Yeah, I'm
Till
fine
the
with
next
that,
meeting?
too.
I'm
I haven't
fine.
been able
No
to.
objection.
I'm fine, so we'll just table it till the next meeting. All right, next, we have item number 4, public comments for items not on the agenda. This is time for someone who wants to speak to any issue over which this board has jurisdiction that is not on tonight's agenda. We are allocating 10 minutes for this at this time, and after 10 minutes, if anyone has additional comments, they can make them later in the meeting when we've scheduled it. And everyone is limited to 3 minutes per person. Is there anyone who has anything tonight? Fantastic. Next item is item number 5, the annual committee board commission report from our social services committee. And Joe, who do we have from social services today?
I believe Georgine Grover is here, and Deborah, right?
Hi, Georgine and Deborah. I think, Georgine, you're the chair, right? Great. Oh, wait a second. Hold on one second. Hi, Colleen. Hi, I'm going to put you on speaker so you can participate, okay? Can you hear us, Colleen?
Yeah.
Okay. You're on, and I'm putting my phone under your microphone. Hope you enjoy it.
Okay.
Okay, Georgine, welcome, and thank you for being on the committee.
My pleasure.
So,
So you have our report. We have developed a request for funds form, and we've developed a rubric, which we've seen in a previous meeting, to try and prioritize all the requests that we get. Half of the budget year is up, and we spent about half of the funds that we were given, and most of them have been spent pretty locally. The one item, actually, we're here to, if you remember, you told us that we could spend up to $5,000 without coming to the Select Board. There's now an item that is over $5,000, and Ann is going to talk to us about, help explain that item. So I think we're doing both things tonight, Joe, is that right?
Yep. This
Okay.
part is just to go over the annual review, and then the next agenda item is specifically for your request of the select board to authorize the
Okay.
$6,500.
Oh, okay. I didn't see the agenda, so. So, we've given money to the Shelburne Craft School, the Shelburne Rec Department, the Age Well, visiting nurses, the Red Cross, and today we started a training program in mental health first aid for members of the town staff and the library staff and the school. That's a 2-day program, 4.5 hours each day, so we're sponsoring that. And then we're going to sponsor a discussion on, they changed the name, what did they change it to?
Discussing race and leading conversations.
Something about conversations about helping people work through issues about racial inequality. So that'll be in December. So that's where we are so far.
thank you. So are you guys working also on, we're going to be doing budget fairly soon,
Yes.
and you're going to be coming and talking to us about your thoughts about that, right?
And we will be requesting the same budget we had last year.
Well, that's good to know. I guess Joe already knows that. And your plan is to spend it in the next year in a similar way versus the way previous social service
Yeah,
committees did, right?
that's why we've done the work to develop ways to prioritize the requests, because we get requests from all over. I mean, regional and state requests. So, yeah, that's what we've been working on.
Does anyone on the board, no, want to jump in?
No, we've expressed great interest and pleasure at the progress you've made and the development of the matrix and at the start and the process, and I think it's been just great. And it plainly has profitable outcomes. I mean, just to read the roster of grants made and the obvious impact those are going to have, so.
Well, and we've also tried to emphasize our role in providing information to the community. So, like, one of the things you should have, Joe, did you pass out that?
I have it here.
Yeah, we did a survey of child caregivers in our community, because the legislation has changed, and those people who provide child care in our community are really being squeezed by their requirements. What we'd like to do is provide some kind of we've talked to the state legislators, and we'd like to provide some kind of a panel where people can learn more about what's being required for childcare, because it squeezes both the parents who need childcare and the child caregivers who end up, making a fraction, like a couple dollars an hour for all the work that they do. So that's another project we've had. We talked about swimming lessons. That didn't come through this summer because the person that was hired by the rec department was canceled at the last minute. But we've tried to provide some information about that. And I think there was one other item article that we've been, lock boxes for people that have medication, young children in the house with medication. Those are being provided by Howard, so we wanted to get that word out. So.
Well, it may not be the most select way to refer to it, but it seems to me you've built a pretty amazing platform
Well, thank you.
to use a contemporary term. And that's just got payoff to the community for a long time. I think you've got to be really commended on that. Not only has it have some of the benefits emerged now, but it's long-term, it's going to be a real,
I hope so.
godsend to the community. And I think it's wonderful as an information supplier, in addition to just simply grant maker. That's not an easy role. That calls for a lot of work and dedication on your parts, and we have to all be very thankful.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
You mentioned something about daycares. Wondering
Yeah.
if you know, does Shelburne have enough daycare facilities for Shelburne people?
Well, that's one of the things we wanted to try working on, and that's why we did this survey. Probably not, it's not as affordable as we would like it to be.
Right.
Some people from Shelburne take their children to a daycare at the business where they work, but we still need probably more slots, yeah.
Yeah, I would just add, I would encourage you to connect with the Planning Commission as they start to review the town plan. This is an important aspect of it, the childcare piece, and a little bit of collaboration could go a long way. I'm sure they'd be very interested in this survey and
That's a great
and
idea.
your
We'll
input.
definitely
So
do
I'd
that,
encourage
yeah.
you to do that.
That's a great.
And thank you
great
for your
thought.
service,
Yeah,
first of all.
yeah.
Important work.
And again, we've also been cooperating with the food shelf, especially on the summer program that they're offering free lunches over the summer. So we've been
Great.
working with that too. Yep.
Thank you
Okay.
very much,
You're
Georgina.
welcome.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And don't go too
Thank you.
far,
No,
because the next item,
is, well,
There's
Ann is
Ann-
going to help explain this because she knows it backwards and forwards.
okay, thank you. So if anyone doesn't have an agenda, it's item 6, Social Service Committee's request for $6,560 for a community outreach program.
There are extra agendas on the desk if people are
Oh, there
interested.
you go, it's right there. All right, Ann, hello.
So thank you, yes. So a few select board meetings ago, I came and talked to you about this work we've been doing regionally with other towns, other town managers to address what appears to be a sudden spike in the suicide rate. Colchester's been doing a really good job of tracking data on this, and it appears to them that the number of attempts have doubled actually since last year. And there were some really awful, intense police encounters in South Burlington with people who were attempting to end their lives several months ago. And so Kevin Dorn from South Burlington got the other managers together and said, we need to address this right away. And he got people from the hospital together. He got the police chiefs together and town managers together, and we talked about a lot of ideas of things we could do. And we actually even had a session with Al Gobey briefly to talk about things we could do. And the thing that seemed to be the low-hanging fruit and the most inexpensive, actually, thing that we could do would be to institute the community outreach embedded social worker program in our towns, like Burlington is currently doing. They have 4 of those embedded in their police department. Those folks spend most of their time on Church Street. However, our towns, so the towns that want to participate in this are South Burlington, Colchester, Williston, Winooski, Essex, and Shelburne. And it would be to share 4 social workers through the Howard Center to do similar kind of work. Aaron Noble has been involved with this project. He helped develop the final draft of the job description that you have in your packet that the Howard Center put together with the idea that these social workers are actually better trained and are at times the right tool to use to either de-escalate crisis situations or to connect people who are in crisis mode with the services they need. What Aaron says is that oftentimes when a uniformed police officer with a gun shows up to someone who's having a mental health crisis, it just creates more trauma and escalates the problem even more. So this is something we've been talking about for several months, and all of the managers and police chiefs feel very strongly we need to do this right away to address what appears to be a crisis, a mental health crisis right now. So in order to do that, since this wasn't a budgeted expense, I've been talking with the Social Services Committee about this project and asking if they might be willing to fund this starting in January through the end of the fiscal year until we can try to work it somehow into our budget for next year. And at the last Social Services Committee meeting, the motion passed to do that. Exactly, with the caveat that they only want to fund it this one time because it wasn't budgeted. They would like to see it be sustainable, so would like to see it worked into either the police budget or some other budget. And your packet shows how the funding was calculated, and it would be calculated that way next year. It'd just be twice the amount because it would be for a full year.
And Ann has pointed out that sometimes the people that are involved in these crises may be Shelburne residents who are in another town when they have the crisis, or sometimes residents of another town come, for some reason are at the access or someplace else that they're having their crisis, and the Shelburne police have to deal with it. So we felt that it was within our priorities to help fund this for this one time 6 months.
Yeah, I think because we're such a small area, the problems cross borders a lot. So I know that Erin our police department has had encounters with people who end up on Church Street and then end up getting in trouble or having a mental health crisis, and vice versa. So we realize that as a group, as a community, regionally, we need to look at the data and track outcomes together, because it would be kind of impossible to track outcomes just for Shelburne. So everyone is talking about that. I know all the other managers are really dedicated to figuring out a way that we can have consistent data that we all use so that we can track outcomes together as a larger community.
Thank you. I can tell you personally that I've been involved with the Shelburne Police Department, in particular Al Fortin, who I credit for saving someone's life who was considering suicide. His wife called me several years ago asking for help, and I reached out to the police department, and Al Fortin triangulated where he was. He spent hours and hours on it, and it was a Shelburne resident, and he ended up in South Burlington or Burlington. I can't remember. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, and our police department stepped up, and they deserve a lot of credit. This is a major problem. It caused me to read. I read 4 books on suicide. I think I'm glad you guys have agreed to do this. Anyone have any comments?
Yeah, I've got two. First, I couldn't agree more with the idea that accidents can happen in Shelburne that don't necessarily involve Shelburne residents. And a great deal of emergency response, almost by definition, doesn't. So I don't think we should be troubled by the fact that there's no equation of how many residents served. My other question is, do you have any sense of the evaluation of the Burlington program over a period of time? Has there been any evaluation, anecdotal or otherwise, of how effective it's been?
I don't have that information. I could get it for you. I know it was the business community on Church Street that really prompted that effort. I think that they used to have 6 and now they have 4. And what I've heard is that they did better with 6 social workers than they're doing now.
All right.
And it is the idea that come a couple of weeks from now, right, there'd be a request for the $13,000 to fund it going forward for
next
18,
year's
19?
budget.
Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea. We're waiting for an official MOU from
Okay.
the Howard Center, and when we have that, we'll put that in with the
Yeah. I mean,
budget
that was
materials.
the other piece that I would called out, is just make sure we're scrutinizing whatever the services agreement is, because things can go badly. Even though they're Howard Center employees, I think there could be issues to at least look at as part of that
Okay.
agreement. So
Yeah, absolutely.
make sure somebody's getting eyes on that.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. This is not necessarily just limited to suicide issues. I mean,
That's
I mean,
correct.
There are, it's a broad range of mental health issues.
Yes, a broad range. And I think, the police department, even though they get training in mental health issues, social workers, like I said, can handle some mental health issues. They tell me oftentimes much better than they do. And they like to, the idea is that they would build a relationship with this person and multiple people who would be rotating through. They would have an office in the police department. They would be in the other departments as well. And that relationship would help them to help each other in these kinds of situations.
Okay. And the only comment I'd like to make is that clearly this is an item that's not in this year's budget from a committee. And in the past, there have been comments that we can't fund requests from the committee. I have no problem with this request, but I think that it should be recognized that there have been concerns about funding these kinds of requests in the past, and hopefully that is not going to be an issue.
Okay, understood.
Gail?
Just a question for clarification, Ann. Did you just say that this is going to be a shared position among the towns? Because it
That's
seems
correct.
as though it might be most effective that way if people are working across borders, if the crises are across borders.
Yes, that's correct. Starting out, I think they're going to cross-train in the different towns, and the idea is that one of the social workers will specialize in Shelburne, but that they'll all be cross-trained. Because just in terms of hours and vacations and time off, there'd be no way to have someone constantly here. And there's still going to be time where people won't be here, and they'll still have to use first call Howard service, other services.
Will there be opportunities for the social workers to do some training with our police?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. They'll be spending the first several months just training and doing ride-alongs on like a regular day schedule, but most likely they'll transition to an afternoon evening schedule because our police departments tell us that's when they're most needed.
And Ann, is it 4 FTEs for the non-Burlington towns? Is that
Correct.
okay?
For 6 towns.
For 6 towns, right? Okay.
All right, anyone else have anything? Dr. Metz? Yeah, sure.
So these people, these social workers will or will not be Shelburne employees and subject to the employee procedures and policies of our town.
They will not be Shelburne employees. They'll be Howard employees. They'll be Howard Center employees. They'll work for the Howard Center.
Joe?
Yeah, a few things. I definitely want to, I think a big thank you to Ann for really representing Shelburne well on this. Kevin Dorn, the city manager in South Burlington, got the ball rolling and encouraged us all to come along, and Ann's been the lead on our end. Aaron certainly has been helpful, but Ann's done the heavy lifting. I think it's a really outstanding idea, and it's what we really should be doing, I think, at the local level. And we've identified this through Secretary Gobey as really a meaningful way that we can provide help to people who need it. I also want to make a comment, and just in terms of to correct or to make sure everyone's clear about the way that the Social Services Committee requests funding is maybe different than some other committees, which I think is important to make a point of. In the past, before this Social Services Committee came into existence, and this is not a knock on the previous social services committee because thanks to them, the food shelf is still going. That was kind of their main, their baby. But this social service committee, instead of sending the $40,000 check to United Way, has come up with a plan, which the select board adopt the policy, where it's going to take individual requests on, try to focus them on Shelburne-centric requests such as this, and make a determination. And the select board adopted a policy almost a year ago now or something like that, stating this. So the process that the Social Service Committee is going through to request these funds is prescribed in a process that it came to the board approved, and that's just the way that this committee is doing
apples and
business.
oranges.
So I just want to be clear on why the Social Service Committee is coming to the board for this.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? Jessica?
Really quickly, I want to mention too that Anne has connected with Representative Webb and myself to make sure that we knew what was going on. And we have talked about it in our state caucus, about this is going on all over the state and that we need to pay. We talk a lot about opiate addiction, but we don't talk a lot about suicide. And yet the suicide numbers are higher. So we will be talking about this year in the legislature, and I'll keep Ann informed and Joe and so forth. The other really quick thing on the child care issue, it's a big issue across the state, as everyone knows, and that's been one of the summer committees that I've been working on all summer. And it's really a three-legged stool, and we are working, those three legs are access, quality, and cost. All three of them need help. And we've been working hard with Building Brighter Futures and the Permanent Fund to try and figure out how do we put this all together. And I think it's great that we're going to do some sort of little panel where we can talk with folks in Shelburne, and hopefully it can go, if it goes well, we could do this throughout the state as we struggle with how do we pay for this child care piece, because it's so important to so many people. And if we want to bring our young people back to Vermont to live and work and bring their families up here, we have to have quality child care. So anyhow, I just wanted you to know that this too is like top of the agenda for the coming year. So
Thanks, Jessica. All right, would somebody like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, so I am assuming that the motion is to approve the Social Services Committee request for $6,500 for the Community Outreach Program. Is that right?
With the stipulation that it is a one-time funding.
Okay. 6560, I'm sorry, I misspoke. All right, and Josh, that was your second?
Yep.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All right, well, by the way, we have lost connection with Colleen.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Georgiana.
Thank you
Ann.
very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I know that the packet got a little funky this week, so for your next item, I'm just passing out the applications,
Okay.
so.
Our next item is item number 7, interview applicants for committees, boards, and commissions. Is this something different?
Is that nothing?
Each one is a set.
Each one is a set.
Each one is a set.
Oh, I think I messed up.
It's okay.
Each one's a
We'll
set.
pass it on the way down. And
Oh, you really.
There's a lot of pressure on me, man. Doing the best I can. Well, no, these are two of the same.
Shouldn't do.
These are all Kate Lally.
Who are we looking for?
I have 4 Kate Lallies here.
Okay, I gave you two, I grabbed the wrong
I have Doris.
ones, I'm sorry.
You have door here. You guys each take a Kate Lally.
One, two.
All right, there's a Doris, there's a Doris. Okay.
There's Rena.
All right, is there a third one?
Rena Norell.
Well, the one I might have to run back to, but it's probably is
Or was it in our packet?
it was in your packet,
Oh.
the planning, or the DRB.
The Lisa's?
yes.
Yes,
Okay. So,
Oh,
I got that.
here's Lisa.
why don't we start with Kate, since we all know Kate very, very well. So, Kate, hello. Thank you for applying for yet another board. And why don't you tell us a little something about your desire to be on the Bike and Ped Path Committee? And this is Kate Lally, everyone.
Well, I
Is this on? Yeah, okay. I'm a long-term time member of the Planning Commission, as many people know, but before that, I was on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Paths Committee, and really enjoyed the work. And the Planning Commission is working very hard to integrate land use regulations with transportation. So to end up with a community in the coming years that will be a little bit easier for us all to get around by foot and by bicycle if we so wish, and hopefully be quite a bit more safe in the process and more comfortable to get around. And so it just seemed to make sense to, when the opening came up, to maybe think about going on the Planning Commission, and because those are the folks who are really, they're charged with figuring out how to implement some of these regulations and policies that we come up with on the Planning Commission. So sort of a putting my money where my mouth is approach. So that's really the inspiration.
Anyone have any questions or comments for Kate?
Well, having worked with Kate for 5 years on the Planning Commission, there is no better person for this appointment, in my opinion. She's a wonderful advocate for bike ped accessibility, and the Planning Commission has done a lot of work on this, as we've probably seen with the form-based code in the corridor, and you'll see more in the town plan during the rewrite. So I'm happy you put your hand up for this, Kate.
I can second that from working with her on the Planning Commission from 10 years ago, Kate.
I know. I've been on for a long time.
Anyone have? Yes, if you would please come up and identify yourself.
Good evening, Wendy Seville. I'm the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Paths
Oh,
Committee.
yeah, hi, Wendy.
And Kate, I'm thrilled that Kate has applied to our committee. We've been one person short. We're also in the midst of pursuing a student member, and Kate's expertise and knowledge of transportation and her work on the Planning Commission will be a huge asset to our committee. So I highly support her application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Appreciate your comments. It's also interesting because you would be serving in two committees, and committees where the Bike and Ped Path Committee can serve to advise the Planning Commission, so you can actually go back and forth and say, yeah, we talked about this. I mean, it's something we've spoken out about for 9 years. Anything else from you guys?
No.
Anyone else? Joe, how long is this term for?
It's a middle of a term that will be until 2019.
Till April 1st, 2019. Someone like to make a motion to appoint Kate Lally to the Bike and Ped Path Committee, starting 2 seconds after the vote until April 1st, 2019.
So moved.
Moved by Jamie, seconded by Jerry. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
And thanks for being on the Planning Commission. All right. Our next person is, let's do
I think Lisa.
Lisa. Okay, Lisa Lamantia. Hi, Lisa. Hi. One of my favorite songs is Mona Lisa. Would you please tell us something about yourself and why you want to be on the DRB?
Sure. My name is Lisa Lamantia, and this coming Friday, will make 1.5 years that my family has lived in Shelburne. I've had the unique experience of living in the Southeast, Northeast, the Midwest, and most recently in 2 areas that have developed quite a bit. And I think that serving my community is extremely important. I have a master's degree in public administration and have spent my career in higher education working to serve both faculty, staff, and students and all of their competing needs. And I think now is just the time for me to step up and serve my community.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone on the board have any questions or comments?
Could you tell us a little more about your role in higher education? Where and...
All right. It's been sort of all over the place. I began my career at Boston University at the Goldman School of Dental Medicine, where I managed the accreditation process for the dental school as well as the graduate programs. I decided that experience didn't give me enough interaction with students, so I then switched over to Northeastern University, where I served as an academic advisor in the College of Business. and worked with students in the College of Business as well as students who were seeking entry into the College of Business. I had roles in orientation as well. Then I moved to New York, where I worked at Columbia University in the Graduate School of Engineering and Applied Science, where my role was the Student Affairs Officer, where I worked with all of the graduate students from application to graduation and advised the student organization as well. After that, we relocated to North Carolina for 6 years, where I worked at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a senior academic advisor, both in the College of Arts and Sciences, as well as students who were seeking entry into the professional schools. Then we, I said I've moved around. And then we relocated to Indiana, and I spent several years with the accreditation process at the IU Dental School. And then once that was a successful accreditation process and site visit, I then went back to academic advising again at IUPUI, so Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And then we moved here a year and a half ago, as I mentioned, and I work at UVM with the graduate school in the public health programs in the College of Medicine, working on their accreditation process.
Do you get that?
Thank you.
Do you have any
You have reason to be
familiarity with
very proud of
land use
your
regulations?
I'm sorry, Sid.
Sorry, Jerry. I was just asking if you're familiar at all with land use regulations, zoning bylaws. Have you ever
I am not.
poked around at our bylaw?
I've
or-
started to look a
Okay.
little bit at them, yes. I am not familiar, but I have not been a practicing dentist or engineer or anything else either. And that is one of, I think, my strong suits, is that I'm able to look at the guidelines and then be able to determine what steps we need to take and follow the regulations.
And are you, last question, are you familiar with on-the-record review
No,
at all? Okay, I would encourage you to Google that. That's
Okay.
a somewhat new
appreciate that.
development here and an important piece of the current DRB's procedures, so.
You're aware, or if you're not, the DRB doesn't pass or propose the bylaws.
Correct.
They just administer. Right.
Yep,
So you know that's your role,
Yes.
not to substitute your personal opinion for the
Correct.
bylaws.
absolutely.
Great, I like hearing that. Anything else by anyone? And this is for a position for,
This takes over a position that will expire in April 1st, 2020. 3-year term.
okay. All right, someone like to make a motion?
Well,
Are there any other?
Are there any other applicants?
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make the point, I forwarded the select board an email from another applicant
Oh, yeah, that's right.
today. You know, the kind of informal deadline was yesterday, so, but,
Right.
you know,
How did that deadline come about?
I posted it that way.
Oh, you just posted it?
Yeah, I mean, there's,
somewhere?
so, you know,
I get it. You
the-
want to
the-
get it out, the
the
materials to
select
everyone.
board can,
Right.
do what it chooses with that application. I have no feelings one way or the other.
I think this has already been passed around, right?
Is she here tonight?
She's not,
She's not here?
no.
Oh,
I
okay,
guess-
she's not here.
What
Right.
I would suggest that, given that she can't be here for us to interview her, and we have a candidate, I think we should put her in the hopper, so to speak, for the next opening, and make sure she's aware of that.
And the her being Doris Sage. It
Yeah, I'm
seems
sorry, I
weird that
thought
we're
that was saying-
speaking her. People
Well,
might want to
yeah,
know who the
true.
her is.
Yeah.
Doris Sage submitted her an application or a letter of intent today. I forwarded it to the board. I explained to Doris that the informal deadline was yesterday and that, you know, the board could choose to do what it pleases today.
Do you know why she isn't here?
She
said
said
she's
she
out
had
of
a family-
town until
family
tomorrow.
emergency.
Okay. Well, what do you guys want to do? You want to, where do you want to go forward with the candidate we have?
We have someone here who showed up tonight and has expressed strong interest in getting involved, so I'm inclined to make the appointment tonight, and there will be more seats on that board.
Yeah, there's always.
So I
seats.
would encourage Doris to stay engaged on it, and not that I wouldn't consider her appointment tonight, but I think she'd be better off being considered in person for the next open seat.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with Jamie.
Everybody's good with that?
I'm good
Okay,
with that.
someone like to make a motion appointing Lisa
Lamantia, yep.
see, I got it, for position on the DRB, beginning right after the vote and expiring on or about April 1st, 2020.
I will make that motion with a not to be recorded or remembered note. And that's about my second love, the DRB.
Okay.
You're going to have a wonderful time, and you're going to make a fantastic contribution
Thank you.
to them, so.
Thank you.
It's
I
an
look forward to it.
incredibly important board. I will tell you,
Yeah.
people think there's a lot of dissent on this board. You should have seen when Shelburne went forward before the DRB. That was amazing. All right, so we have a motion by Jerry. Is there a second? Second by Jamie?
Josh,
Oh,
second.
Josh second? Okay, Josh seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for applying.
All right, and I need my glasses.
Dog.
Our next person is,
That's it.
what about Irina?
Oh, I'm sorry. Irina has, since I put the pack together, has decided not to join the dog park committee at this point.
Okay.
Sorry.
So we're finished with this item,
You're
right?
finished with that? No? Okay. I guess I wasn't clear on that one for today. Well, they can take it up. You have an opening, I know that. I just wasn't, sorry, I wasn't
Okay,
clear for that one tonight.
tell you what, Gail, would you like to stand up to the microphone and let us know, because we have nothing in our packs. This is the first I've heard of this. So,
If someone's
So
here,
how
we
to-
may as well
You can interview them.
have a conversation.
I'm fine with it. I'm
Our
still completely
candidate is
fine.
John Casina, who has attended one of our meetings and has submitted an application some weeks ago, and I received a note back indicating that the hearing would be tonight.
Okay.
I may have got my wires
It
crossed. It
could just
happens.
be one of those things got caught.
Anyway, I would highly recommend John, but I'll let him speak to his qualifications himself
thanks for
because he
letting us
knows them
know.
in more detail.
Okay, is everyone good? I'm totally
Yeah,
good with
thanks,
this.
Gail.
Everybody good?
100%.
Okay, John, would you please come up and tell us about your background and why you'd like to be on the Natural Resources Committee with Gail?
Yeah, so John Cosina. I've been a 12-year resident of Shelburne, living actually in Gales neighborhood up on Morse Drive. My interest in the Natural Resources and Conservation Committee really stems from both personal and professional interests in the environment and issues related to sustainability. I hold an MBA with a focus in sustainability. I currently work for an organization called 1% for the Planet, which is a global organization focused on growing environmental philanthropy. And probably more pertinent to this role on the committee. Again, I've been living in the community for 12 years, but have not served on a committee. So definitely a strong interest in getting more involved. I also have 2 daughters, 3 and 1, and want to bring them up in Shelburne and want it to be the type of community that I'm proud of and that they will benefit from. So yeah, just getting more involved in what's going on in the town and starting with this great committee that seems really interesting, and I've enjoyed hearing about the work through Gail. Seems like an interesting start.
You had me at hello, but okay. Any comments, questions from anyone?
This seat is open till 4/1/2019.
4/1/2019, and please, these things get
No
lost every
problem.
once in a
Yeah.
while. Someone like to make a motion to make a motion?
So moved.
And second?
Moved to appoint John Casina to a position on the Shelburne Natural Resources Committee for a term to begin right away and ending on or about April 1st, 2019, right?
Correct.
Correct, Josh, for the second?
Yep.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you both. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Lisa. All right, got them all, right? Our next item is item number 8. Discuss revised policies, personnel, social media, and drug alcohol testing for CMV drivers. Joe, why don't you?
I'll start it out, and just to be clear, because I guess the question came in today, that the personnel policy and the social media policy are global policies, and the drug and alcohol policy is specifically for CMV drivers. So maybe that was I don't know if that was confusion or not for people, but I heard the question. Anyways, as folks here know, the select board knows the personnel policies are 100 years out of date, and I know it was a priority for the board and for me to work on this. And Ann and I have probably been working on it for about a year now, and very seriously since July 1st, when the new budget season came in. We have consulted with an HR specialist from VLCT. We have had the document reviewed also by the town attorney. We have reviewed it internally by a committee that Ann has led and has made us sit through very long meetings. Ann, myself, Peter Frankenberg, and Susan Canizero. We have also distributed this to all staff for their comments, which some are still trickling in. So for the last at least 5 or 6 months, it's just been a lot of work. Ann has done an absolutely tremendous job. And now the document is before the board. The board should not, Ann can supplement what I'm going to say here, but should not feel rushed in any way or pressured into reviewing this quickly and approving it quickly. I think we would hope that this could be done maybe before town meeting anyways. But, look, this is, it's a lot to look at. There's no expectation that the board's going to fully digest this tonight, and maybe not in even 2 or 3 meetings. And if it takes more than that, we'll be here with you all the way and respond the best we can. Also, the document is posted online, the draft document, so comments from the public will be encouraged as well. So, Ann?
Yeah, the majority of the major changes are just to bring us into compliance with new state and federal laws. There's a few other tweaks here and there. Like I said in the memo, we did send it out for a 2-week comment period to all staff. And we did get, I just want to give a call out to the folks who read through it and had really good comments. Ted Nelson, Chris Eustace, Chris Robinson, Dean Pierce, Bruce Buerlane, Sue Maraska, and Walt Arsenault. And it was all, very well reasoned, good comments. One thing I want to point out is that a benefit that we talked about in our committee changing, but we don't have to if you don't feel comfortable with it, is to increase the maximum amount of sick time that can be carried over from 90 to 120 days. The benefit to this is that if someone becomes very seriously ill, they will be able to use more sick time before they have to go on long-term disability, and that only lasts so long. So if someone had a really serious illness, there could be some time out of work where they wouldn't be getting paid. So that's an added benefit. But what we were also looking to do was to no longer be able to convert sick time to vacation time. The problem we're having there, you might see it as a problem, you might not, is that people were banking so much vacation time so that when they would leave the town, they'd have these really large payouts that were unbudgeted and unplanned for. So it would be kind of a shock to the system. But we did get lots of comments, concerns about this, concerns that increasing the amount of sick time and not being able to carry it over might incentivize people to take sick time when they weren't really sick. So that was the biggest comment that I got. I have no skin in that game either way. I just wanted to bring that to your attention that we're having a lot of, retirements and people leaving, and those are unbudgeted payouts. We now have a section on fraud, which is really good, I think. Who to talk to if you suspect fraud, and a way to keep people from there being any retaliation for people reporting suspected fraud. It's an important thing to have. Vermont is a very fraud-ridden state, unfortunately, because we're so trusting of folks. There's a new social media policy. We don't currently have one. Our current policy was so out of date. It was before social media really existed. It was actually, I think it was typed on a typewriter. So this is a new thing, and we started with the VLCT model policy, and it was really much more refined by our town attorney. It's something we're looking to get our arms around. The town has developed several of its own Facebook pages and some Twitter accounts. We're just looking to have a moderator that's trained, that knows how to use social media, knows what the liability is to the town for things that are said on social media. There was some concern, more than one person commented that we also need to be concerned about free speech when we're looking through the social media policy and making sure that it in no way infringes on free speech rights. So something to think about, have an eye on that when you're looking at that policy. Our town attorney wrote it in such a way, I believe, that gives the caveat that it's not intended to in any way hamper free speech. Also, it continues to say, where there's a conflict with the collective bargaining agreements, those control. It's really important to remember that. We did have a good conversation with the fire and rescue departments about, if there's a department conflict, a department policy that conflicts with the personnel policy, the policy states that the personnel policy controls. But fire and rescue, they have very specific guidelines and training requirements, and that they believe are more stringent than anything we have in our personnel policy. So we changed the wording there a little bit so that they can continue with those policies. So those are the main things I wanted to point out. There was a concern, and I think it could be just confusion about the review process. The language there really hasn't changed much. It's almost exactly the same as it was before. There's always been a policy to do personnel reviews on an annual basis.
So this is on the town website already?
Yes. And I should point out that the drug and alcohol policy for commercial motor vehicle drivers is only for commercial motor vehicle drivers and not for all employees. And those folks are the ones with licenses. They're in our highway department and our wastewater and water department. The new policy is based on, it's just more robust. It's based on the VLCT model policy. It's based on a more comprehensive review of federal regulations. Paul Goodrich, I was told, was kind of the expert on how the drug and alcohol testing for CMV drivers is done here in Shelburne. So we had a good conversation about it. He read through it. It's a lot more words than what we had before. But essentially, he reports that procedurally, it's what they do now. It it describes a lot more of, when there's questions, what to do and what the procedure is and what the process is. And I know when I was in Milton, we passed the model policy there. So I think a lot of other towns have already passed the VLCT model policy.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I've got some observations, but I'll wait. I'll wait till people want to talk. That's fine.
Anything right now?
No, I'll wait too for whatever the
Okay.
comments are.
Dr. Metz?
So I have a question and concern about that fourth bullet there on your memo, where there's a conflict between. The second sentence, or actually the third sentence, where there is a conflict between the town personnel policy and a department policy, the former will control, except for the fire and rescue, as they have unique requirements and performance standards for these agencies. Why are you not including the police department? Certainly the police department has exceptional and unusual and rigorous standards and training requirements, and I would encourage the inclusion of the police department in that particular statement, so that if there's a conflict between the town personnel policy and the police department, that the police department is exempted from the personnel policy, as you have exempted fire and rescue. That's
I
my.
don't think we've exempted it.
No, they're not exempted. I think the difference, and that's a good point. I think you make a very valid point and something to think about as you're reading
The police
through.
department also has a collective bargaining agreement,
They
which
they
is addressed
do.
in the first part of that
Right,
sentence.
and also the fire and rescue squads are all volunteer. So it's
They're a different type of employee.
a different type of employee, yeah.
All right, anyone else have anything? In the back, Mr. Boyd?
Sir? I can't squat down that low. Chris Boyd, Thomas Road. So, a couple things. Is the old policy on the website as well, so they can be compared?
The old policy has
Yes.
been on the website since our
Okay,
website's
so
been
it's
up.
there.
Yep, it's under the, it's
All
on
right.
the HR, the Human Resources page of the website is the old policy.
In the new policy, anything that was in the previous policy, is that barred or bulleted so that it can be identified
No,
easily?
because the old policy was so old that it's not on a Word document that we could work off of.
Okay.
We
There's
have.
no red line.
There's
Yeah.
no red line
No,
version of
yeah.
the old policy. It was written
Okay.
on a typewriter, honestly. And so we had to start fresh, basically, with a model policy that is given to all Vermont municipalities. But, I mean, Shelburne and wherever else are different enough that, I mean, there's elements of the model policy, but we've really done an overhaul to be Shelburne specific.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I apologize for that, but it would have been so redlined, it would have been really confusing.
yeah. And as far as the issue that Dr. Metz had, maybe the easiest thing is to put in their verbiage something to the respect of the most stringent document will prevail.
Well, I mean, I think we'd have to check on that with council before making a, but those are valid
It'd be a
points.
simple fix.
Those are valid points. We'll certainly have a response for
Yeah.
the board and the public on those.
With the sick time, has the town considered following maybe what the state does, and you limit the amount of accumulated vacation time or personal time, whatever the case may be, but sick time, because the state also has no trading in sick time for vacation time. So there's no limit on it, but it's also, nothing's paid when the person retires out. So it just openly accumulates.
I mean,
Joe, do you have something?
well, I mean, at this point, quite frankly, the select board can do what it pleases with the policy. Ann and staff have worked hard to at least give you a document that we feel good about. We made some changes. Some changes are some benefits to employees. Some changes maybe you could be seen as less of a benefit to employees compared to the current policy. There's reasoning behind all of it. So, but at this point, like I said, and I mean that honestly, you know, we'll be working with the select board. This is a document that you need to adopt. So if comments that Mr. Boyd makes or others are compelling, hey, don't let me stop you from making changes that you think are in the best interest of the town.
Well, let's talk a little bit about process, because that's how you started it off, and that is timeline for trying to approve something, and you mentioned doing it before town meeting, and that probably makes sense. So I would hope that everyone has the opportunity. It's a long, long document, and if you want to really get into it, this is not a single read, and it's probably a read where you compare it to other personnel policies to see what they have that we don't have, or what we have that they don't have, and to make some real concrete, suggestions.
And I wouldn't, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. And I wouldn't, dissuade people from comparing this to their company's personnel policy or anything like that, but I'd also caution you of trying to make too many one-to-one comparisons between, what is legal and what is kind of a practice in municipal organizations versus what might be found in some other businesses or even at the state level. I mean, things are different. So, if you have questions or, hey, what about this idea or that idea, certainly we'll look at them. But there are unique aspects of municipal HR that, we need to just be mindful of.
Well, thank you for taking this on, Joe. I know Jerry and I been pushing it.
It's Ann. Ann's
thank you
done
very much.
the work.
All right, we have some more comments. Dr. Metz, I'm going to give there's two other people with their hands up. Everybody gets a shot first. So, Linda, if you please identify yourself and your comment.
Linda Reel, Falls Road. My question regarding the personnel policy is I've noticed in the language there are parts of the wording where it states employees not covered by a contract. And some of what I read, I'll just read one sentence. The town may terminate such an employee, the one not covered by a contract, at any time without any notice, for any reason, without a hearing. I'm wondering what employees those might be.
I don't know what page you're looking at, or maybe I can.
So I would say those are employees that are still on probation.
Yeah, right.
Once the probationary period ends, they everything has to comply with the termination process, which is spelled out in the document.
Right.
So
new employees are under probation, typically for 6 months, and we can extend it if we want. Police officers, I think, must be in probation for a year,
12
for 12
months.
months. So that's what, thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
thank you, that answered it.
Okay, please, if Ms. Warden, right? If you come up and.
Shannon Warden. I have a question about the employee discipline. It talks about progressive discipline. That's something I use in education, so I think that's progressive for the town to have that. I think that's good. And it talks about utilizing department heads, consulting with department heads, but it doesn't have anything about how department heads themselves would be disciplined should something happen. So that's a wonder of mine. It doesn't clearly spell that out. So I don't know if it would just follow the same process. You just take the department head out of the equation. So that's a question.
Which section is that? Can you just point us out?
That is section 11, page 36. Your town charter says that the town manager has the exclusive authority to appoint, fix the salary of, suspend, and remove all employees of the town appointed by him or her subject to the provisions of this chapter and with the consent of the select board. So I don't know if that would prevail over the personnel policy for department head. And then the last piece of that would be, how would that play into the police chief, who by law, state statute says, legislative body, and it's D, the town manager, when appointed pursuant to this chapter 37 of this title and its municipality, blah, 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 can establish a police department and appoint to police officers and a chief of police who shall be a police officer. So your police chief is first a police officer and then a police chief. So his obligation or her obligations will always be to be a police officer first and your chief second. And there's a certain standard there to be a police officer, so much that there's a state statute for that. So then that brings us back to the personnel policy, and then what you have in your charter. So for police officers, and then your police chief, should there need to be disciplinary action, which one do you go to?
In other words, the terms are ambiguous?
I think it's ambiguous. I think the process for disciplining a police officer is ambiguous, and then your police chief itself is ambiguous because it's not clear which process you'd be following, because this, to me, appears that there are three.
Great. Thank you.
Good comments, thank you.
Well, I just
You
want to
wanna
make
field-
a cool point about police officers, that they're covered by a collective bargaining agreement, and that actually spells out some of that. So just want to be clear about that.
So is the police chief also included under that, under the collective bargaining?
Police chief's not part of the collective bargaining agreement.
It's just the officers, right? Or up to sergeant? Is that what it is?
The lieutenant is not covered under the collective bargaining agreement.
Dispatch is covered.
Is the deputy chief?
No.
All right, any other comments? Oh, Dr. Metz, please.
Well, I'm sorry to be persistent. No, I'm not. I'm not clear on what the answer was to my suggestion. The criteria for determining the conflict, rules under the conflict for fire and rescue is that they have unique requirements and performance standards. And I suggest to you that, I reiterate that the police department does as well. So if that's the criteria, if those are the criteria, then it seems that the police department logically could be under the provision where the department policy would prevail. If you have another standard, such as was mentioned at the front table here, where they're volunteers, then let's put it in there, that volunteers are not subject to the town personnel policy. But as you have it now, the criteria listed are unique requirements and performance standards. Certainly, the police department qualifies under that, I would think.
So Dr. Metz,
So I'm not sure what the consensus was.
I think our answer, at least, was that you brought up a valid point, and we want to make sure that we have a very clear answer for you, and we will get that to you directly as quickly as possible, and to the public at large, certainly at the next meeting. We will be very, our answer to you is you bring up a valid point, and we want to make sure that we answer it clearly.
So it's not being put aside because of the volunteer status of the police, of the...
Yeah, and if
That's all I wanted to make sure of.
if that language creates a problem, we could go back to what we used to do with fire and rescue, which is just to spell out which sections apply to them. It's just that their discipline process is actually more stringent than ours in some ways. Our discipline process is very much based on what most municipalities have to do because of certain federal law that applies to public employees. But since the fire and rescue team are all volunteers, they can create their own set of guidelines, which are very different because you wouldn't be actually, they aren't considered public employees if they have to be disciplined or let go. So I'm not married to that language. It was just kind of a quick and easy way to solve that problem. What we did in the past policy was to just point out fire and rescue squads are only subject to section blah, blah, blah. So that could
Thanks.
make it easier.
So from a process standpoint, Joe, you mentioned trying to have the select board hopefully approve whatever final document we want to approve in February.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like this group to, put energy into having this adopted and in place before town meeting. Hopefully that gives you enough time that you don't feel rushed, but also a deadline to say, hey, let's work towards something here. Because this is an important document. It's something that the board has charged me, quite frankly, as a goal to complete. And no one can doubt that a 30-year policy should be updated as soon as possible.
And by the way, whatever we adopt can always be amended going forward. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, having been one of the chief buggers, this is a big night. I don't know that all of us understand quite the undertaking here or how deficient we were with policies that were needed updating, and I think this is a fantastic effort.
And Anne really deserves the kudos. I mean, she's done 99% of the work.
There are some special things about it. There's some gems in here. The IT officer introduced as a gem. I think the fact that you made the effort to circulate it among those most affected and that they were, had lots of opportunity to comment is really important. And this is now that the college football team, for which I'm an unapologetic fan, is finished.
Alabama lost.
I started with some of this, but have not done it justice, and look forward to the time when I will be able to. I did have one thing that crossed my mind, and before I forget it, I'll mention it to you. I had some experience with pools of sick time, wherein employees contributed to a pool which benefited an individual among them who might have an extended illness of 6 to 9 months or a year in some cases. And it was my experience, I promoted the idea because employees were not shy of being willing to give up so many days over a period of time, many of which were in surplus anyway at the end of the year. And I saw some situations in which someone was able to go to the pool and access 110 days in one case. And I'd like, if that idea has any merit, if you think that would be neat to see if it was workable here. But again, this is fantastic. You can't be commended enough, really.
It's a very interesting thought, Jerry. Okay, anyone else? Anyone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Well, I wish I had known what the time frame for this was. So I have gotten through the whole thing, as well as looked at 3 other municipalities' personnel policy just to get a sense of where we are, and as well as the old personnel policy. And I certainly am not a personnel expert, far from it. I'm sure all 3 of the people sitting up here know far more about this, or the legal aspects of these things than I. But I just like to offer some observations, being, a public servant for 30 years. Just the sense that I got from reading this is one that the language gives me some concerns, and I appreciate, Anne, for you clarifying. I think it was Linda's comment about the aspect of this at-will policy that you can be dismissed for any reason at any time with or without any reason. I think that's certainly a new part from the old one. It's very emphatic, and I think reading that sort of certainly gives people some cause. And I think all of my comments should be taken with the understanding that if we're asking our town employees to work here, that we want to provide enough employment security so that they can feel that they can do their best work without constant concerns about interpretations of their language or their body positions. I mean, there are a number of aspects of this policy, one being the definition of insubordination, which is on page 3, which I have no problems with the first 3 lines. You know, I guess I can't say 3, but essentially there is language that is really subject to subjective interpretation. And I think that is really a concern in that you want to have a work environment that doesn't subject people to randomness. That you need to have a place where people are not going to worry about what the possible outcomes of what can be interpreted, that if the only answer to a question can be a glowingly positive response given in a military salute, that could be some curves. And I think some of this language could be interpreted to suggest that. I looked at, in none of the other things I read, is there this large section definition of insubordination, which plays into the a section later on. Then this all, goes down to, if we look at that employee discipline part, again, it repeats the statement about, that you can be fired for anything at any time, for any reason or without reason. And even though that may be the general legal definition of an at-will position, it certainly would give me pause. But then it makes statements like that there's also conduct outside of identified prohibited content, and that the list of things you can't do is not exhausted. So there could be other things that were added to that list. And so this is where the insubordination comes in. So you have other statements about abusive, threatening, or contrary to the community standards. Okay, there's lots of things that don't have good definitions here. And my concerns in all of this is that we want our employees to feel safe and secure, that they can do their job without worrying. And so it's unclear when the flexible discipline process, as said, which I think is excellent in the way you're doing it, but when does it apply? If on one hand you can say you can be terminated without notice, and on the other hand there is a discipline process, I think this needs to be clarified a little bit in how that's working. Just also, I note that on the grievance procedures, on the beginning, and I think you said that it doesn't cover probationary employees, but under the grievance, it does cover probationary employees. So that's just another thing to look at. And then when we come to the termination process, it again goes off into sort of wide-ranging conduct outside of identified areas. And in some ways, the whole process is inconsistent with the statement that there needs to be no reason or no notice to fire somebody. So I think just some looking and making sure there's consistency out throughout this would be very helpful. And I guess another general point in this would be, and I think Chris brought this up, about, the feedback loops, either to the town department head or the top department head and town manager, making sure that these lines of command are clear in the appeal process for these grievances. It's very clearly determined under the fraud section, which you mentioned, that the how those things should be reported to the department head and to the town manager, but it's not really clear how if the that in some ways that whole idea of fraud could be broadened to look at other kinds of behaviors as well, which don't fit neatly into this chain of command type thing. And so in a lot of public organizations, you need some kind of feedback so that employees that are concerned about activities have a way other than the chain of command to make that known to people. Certainly, that exists in the federal government, I think in the state government as well. But it's akin to a whistleblower policy, that people have a way of confidentially contacting possibly the select board and saying, okay, I'm concerned about what's going on. I really can't bring this up through the chain of command because of possible repercussions. And I think that's, again, another part of making a comfortable employment environment for people. So I won't go through any more because obviously we have lots of time to do this.
Yeah, so, I mean, it would be helpful. I mean, I don't know about Ann. I think some of the comments might have been confusing in terms of what applied and what didn't. I think some are probably valid.
I'll be happy
It'd be
to do
really
that.
helpful if we got those in writing, Josh,
Absolutely,
so
and
we
I'd be happy to
could
do
go
that.
through them and then respond to them. I mean, that's,
That'd be great.
So
If
do
anybody
we-
has any comments,
well-
please send them over to the town manager so they can get them in advance and we can address them in a timely
Yeah.
way, and including people on the select board, because,
Yeah.
oh boy,
yeah, and again,
just a
you
little
know,
courtesy
I mean,
getting it to them ahead of
we,
time.
we don't want to dilly-dally, not get this done, but we do have a few months to work on this, so no one should feel overly rushed. And I don't mean to cut off your comments, Josh, at all, but I'm just saying if you email me your comments A through Z, we will absolutely look over
Okay.
them.
I just want to make just a couple, if we're going to do social media policy on this as well, that and this is just a question to point out for future discussion, is, and the question about this, and which would help me in any future, is it seems that this applies to everybody in the town, including the committees or the CBCs in general. And I have a question about a line of authority here. And this is because it seems like the way it's stated, any of the CBCs wanted to have their own social media site, the town manager has to approve that.
Correct.
And what my question about that is, my understanding, and I certainly can be wrong on that, is that the select board appoints people to the CBCs, and they're not responsible. They act as advisory to the select board, and they don't report to you, even though you're an ex officio member. So my concern is that if a committee wants to have their own social media thing, who then approves that any material? Because it seems like a conflict in authority for a committee that's appointed by the select board to necessarily need to have approval or censorship from the town manager. And I mean, if you look at this, it's really important if you talk about a quasi-judicial body, Then you have the concern about something, well, the Supreme Court can then be overruled by the president, and we know that doesn't happen. So I think these are just things that, these are all part of town government, but we have to figure out how to do that. And if you go even to the minutia of this, of that if a volunteer can't use their private email to participate, then the town has to give out town email addresses to everybody. So they're just things that I think need to be considered.
Should we commit to a February meeting date? First
The
or
last
second
meeting in February is the drop deadline for the board to approve it.
Well, it's the last meeting, so.
That's right.
I wonder if we took it in chunks, if we just did a third.
I think if
It might be
people
more
send their
manageable. I don't
comments
know.
to Joe and Ann, so they can have their comments in advance, because one part is going to impact another
Yeah.
part of the policy anyway.
Right.
So they can synthesize everything, analyze it, and come back and give us a report, provide it to us in advance, and then we can have a meaningful discussion. And whenever that is done, I would recommend we try to do it before the last meeting in case we can't agree
Well,
at the meeting.
I'm
We have
planning on
another
put-
shot.
I mean, I'm planning on, it seems like this should be on the agenda every regular meeting from here until the end of February, and then,
Yeah,
you know,
agreed.
hopefully at some point we'll be in a position that the board's ready to take action. So I just plan on having this as a reoccurring agenda item between now and whatever the second Tuesday in February is, and
Great.
hope to finish it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Next is item number 9, update from our village safety group. So, we have Jane Zanotti, I see, jumping up, so, and Mr. McBride, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, Jeff.
He's doing the technology.
Yeah, it is. Dean might, I think Dean set it up.
So Joe, does the select board have that report that I sent you late today?
They received an email. I only printed out for them the first page, not all the
Okay.
visuals, but they did receive on email the visuals, and it is online with the rest of the stuff if people
Okay.
want to look at it.
Because
So-
I thought I had sent everything to Joe early yesterday morning, only for some reason I didn't send it to him, but, so he didn't get it until this afternoon. I am Jane Zanotti, and I'm here representing the Village Pedestrian Safety Group, and I want to clarify that that's the name of our group, is the Village Pedestrian Safety Group. And I want to just give you a quick history of our group, just to make sure that everybody's kind of caught up about who we are and what we're doing, and give you some overarching beliefs that guide our work. And so thank you for the time tonight to do that. Some of you may be aware that our neighborhood group first gathered informally in July of 2016 after several individuals met with town officials to address excessive vehicle speeds on Falls and Marset roads. We gradually formalized the structure of our group and named it the Village Pedestrian Safety Group, and I volunteered to be the facilitator in October of 2016. Jerry's been a member of our group since that time as a neighbor and as a select board member. So initially our mission, and it still is today, our mission is to improve and ensure pedestrian safety within Shelburne Village. During the last year and a half, we've collaborated with a number of people. We've worked closely with Joe, Dean, Lieutenant Fortin, and used Local Motion as consulting organization. We've met with town department heads, including highway, fire, police, and rescue. And most recently, we've connected more formally with the Bike Paths Committee and the Library Construction Steering Committee. We also very much appreciate the support that the Select Board has shown us through the budgeting process and recently through monies earmarked in the Capital Improvement Plan. So we've worked to implement strategies to calm traffic and improve pedestrian connectivity in order to lower speed limits in the historic village core to a level that's both safe and enforceable. This is an effort we are still working on. We plan to continue our work based on the belief and commitment to support a changing culture that gives priority to walkable towns and cities. This belief promotes a more balanced view of how pedestrians, bicyclists, cars, trucks, and town safety and maintenance vehicles use and share the roads. It is clear to us that there are improvements that can be made to the landscape of our village that respects all users of our roads, but most importantly gives long overdue prioritization to the safety of pedestrians. So that's just kind of a introduction. And now I would like to get to more specifics. I'm not going to go through the whole report that you have and that's online, but I want to highlight the accomplishments of the past year and a half, and also to highlight some tangible results based on our efforts. So far, crosswalks have been painted at Bacon Drive and Falls Road, Fisher Road and Falls Road, the cemetery entrance and Falls Road, and Green Hills Drive and Marset, along with accompanying signage that goes with those, the painted crosswalks. A permanent solar speed feedback sign was installed on Falls Road near the La Platte Nature Area that can be moved back and forth between the north and southbound lanes. And a big thank you to Lieutenant Fortin for researching the appropriate equipment and arranging for it to be installed by Paul Goodrich's department. I'd also like to just give a kind of a shout out, although not products of our efforts, to the new sidewalks on the west side of Route 7 and the future, and also the sidewalk on what we call Lower Salt Falls Road near the, going to the La Platte Nature Area near the La Platte Bridge, and to the future installment of the flashing light at the Route 7 crosswalk. That was a product of the Eagle Scout, Garrett, I think his name is, yeah. These projects, while not from our efforts, add to the safety and walkability of our village, and we appreciate it. So in the future, we would like to continue our efforts to see speed limits lowered to appropriate levels along Falls and Marset roads, probably 25 or 30 miles an hour, depending on the location along those roads. Repaint the fog lines on Falls and Marset at an industry standard of 10-foot lanes, and paint fog lines on roads that have none around the rest of the town. Redesign the crosswalk at the cemetery with the addition of a grass strip along Upper Falls Road next to the La Platte Nature Area. And I think I spoke to the select board the last time I was here about that project, and this is where we have some visuals to show what that could look like. This is the crosswalk as it stands now, and then with the improvements we'd like to see would add that grass strip, which gives the impression of narrowing, is that a word? Making the road more narrow, although the road is not, you know, the actual landscape is not, of the road is not more narrow. It just visually looks to cars like it's more narrow. You have those kind of stanchions that, and the landing pad going out to the crosswalk, which, and the sign in the center of the crosswalk that make it all more noticeable. And then we can show the other crosswalks and what they might look like. Because this is the first, let me say, the one that we just looked at would be our first priority, because that's where the speeds have shown to be the highest along that stretch of road. And all of these kinds of changes actually help to slow cars down when there are these kind of landscape changes that make the road look more welcoming to pedestrians. So then this is the crosswalk at Church Street and Falls Road, and this is what it could look like. And we did do a pop-up demonstration in June to kind of do a temporary version of this. And after we look at these pictures, we have some data from that pop-up demonstration. So that's that one. And then this is Bacon Drive without the crosswalk paint, which there is right now. And then this is what it could look like. And you'll notice that this lady gets around town because she's in several of our... Yeah. She does a lot of walking. My son looked at this and he said, "Is that you, Mom?" And I said, "No, that's not." I thought it was you at first, too. Yes. And I said, "I don't think it's me." Huh? Oh, the lines along the side of the road, the white lines along the side of the road. of the fog, is a fog line. So again, here you have a landing pad that actually designates where the crosswalk is. You have some of those stanchions that outline it for people so they can stand and actually wait for the traffic, stand safely and wait for the traffic to stop before crossing the crosswalk, with those nice signs that remind everybody about the state law that it's a requirement that you stop in for crosswalks. So that's Bacon Drive, and then this is Marset. There is a painted crosswalk there now with this signage, but this is what it would look like once it were improved. And there she is again. She's really taken a long walk around town. So and again, we've given priority in our planning to the crosswalk at the cemetery because that's a nice center point of Falls Road to help to slow traffic down along there. But eventually, we'd like to see these improvements at all the crosswalks in town. So then, Jeff, can you go to the compliance? So then I don't want to take too much time on this, but it's kind of interesting. Based on that pop-up demonstration we did last June where we did some temporary versions of those beautiful visuals we just saw, we collected data about compliance rate of cars before our pop-up went, before they popped up, and then during the pop-up. And the compliance, I had to go back to our mathematician or our engineer on this. The compliance rate is this: the total number of cars that complied or stopped for pedestrians divided by the total number of cars both complying and non-complying. So you can see that before, and it has the three locations, no, well, you did two, right? Yeah. So the compliance rates were down, in the 60 percentile at its 66.67 at its best. And then we did the exact same days of the week at both the cemetery and Church Street crosswalks, and the compliance rates went up to in the 80s percentile up to 92.31. So you can see that just making those changes, even though they were just temporary changes, made a huge difference at the rate at which cars stop for pedestrians. I think it's pretty impressive. So that's the crosswalks in terms of our hopes for the future. And then the last thing is a gateway entrance to the village core on Irish Hill. So as you're coming down Irish Hill over the La Platte Bridge, there's a possibility, and we haven't really thoroughly explored this. We did a pop-up like this, but we did it on the other side of the bridge, on the west side of the bridge. But we're thinking now it might be best to do it on the east side of the bridge as cars are coming down that hill where they really pick up speed. And where that might be some kind of median, not a curb median, but some kind of designation that kind of makes it more noticeable that they're about to go over this bridge and into a very heavily populated part of town, with a sign that might look something like this that Jeff McBride did a mock-up for us. And we had one up during our September pop-up.
Can I ask you a question? When I saw that sign, I noticed it was just pedestrian. A lot of bikers use that same area. I was
Right.
wondering why you didn't include that also.
Well, I mean, our group is focused on pedestrians, and we certainly, in all of our planning, consider needs for bicycle lanes, because we certainly, that's all part of it, is that these are shared roads. So this is just a possibility. So it could say a pedestrian, bike-friendly community, because certainly the Champlain bike lane goes right through that road. So that's a good point. So, questions? That's the end of my...
Thank you very much. You guys have certainly made a difference. And thank you, Jerry, for your participation on this.
Yeah.
Jane, I'll comment on your pop-ups.
Excuse me.
Can you use the microphone?
Please.
Yeah.
I could have been that lady on the visuals, except I would have my big dog with me. But I do the crossing on Bacon Drive, and it made a huge difference, not just when the white lines went across, but to have those, they look like barrels to me. People still hardly ever stop there, even with the lines on the road. But when those stanchions were there, they definitely stopped more often than not. So I give you a thumbs up on that.
Thank you.
Is there any other
Thank you.
comments?
I was
Joe?
just gonna say real quick, that I think Jane and the whole group is doing a really great job. What's been about 2 years you're working on, and I think that we're starting to get at a point where some real significant improvements are kind of just on the horizon. I know it's taken a little while. I think that a number of the improvements that they're suggesting not only will reduce speed limits, which I think is probably the main goal, but appears to me to be an aesthetic benefit to the community as well, which is maybe just as important. And we're still working. I know it's been frustrating with the committee and myself that we keep running up against the realities of what state law will allow us to do with speed limits and what it might not. And we're still exploring that in our ability to reduce the speed limit on these sections of roadway to either 25 or 30, where they really should be. Instead of they're posted at 35 right now, we actually have a conference call with Representative Webb and Brumstead on December 7th or something like that with Legislative Counsel, who has been, the Legislative Counsel has written a number of traffic laws in the state, and we're going to kind of further explore our legal ability right now to lower that speed limit. But the reality is that we don't have necessarily the control that maybe we'd hope, or that one would hope that we would have, to just kind of set the limit to where we think it should be. Great. But we are working on that, and I think that a lot of these proposals are certainly...
Well, after the December 7th, at the next meeting, maybe you could provide an update in your manager's report as to...
Absolutely will.
What the conversation.
So when you collected the data on the stops, did you get any data on speeds as well? Just following up on that?
Well, unfortunately, we had some mix-up with the police department, and that was supposed to be part of it, but the speed tubes didn't go down at the right times in order for it to be comparable.
Mm-hmm.
We do have some data about, some recent data about speeds on those roads. And as I mentioned, definitely the section of Falls Road that runs north-south is where there's the largest number of violators, but there's a number, on all that area, it's 35 miles an hour, which is the same speed limit as Spear Street. And so cars think, well, I can go 40 or 45. Well, you're driving 45 miles an hour through a densely populated area. So, but no, that was part of the goal, and it didn't really happen.
Mr. Moran has a comment.
I have
If you could please just use the mic.
I have a question for you and maybe for Joe. So the crosswalk in front of the police station going to Church Street, and this has happened several times to me.
Across Route 7.
Right. So I stop for usually a kid coming across, and I can see the cars behind me, unfortunately usually from New York, going to pass, and they do not see that kid in front of me. And a couple of times I've thought of swerving to stop that car and causing an accident of saving the kid. Lately, sometimes there's cones there to prevent them from passing, right, where the police come out and go on. Are they not always there? Is there something that
You're
can be done?
You're recommending that they stay there.
That they stay there,
I
or
agree
that
with
there's
you.
something that,
it's a good point. I've had that
or bringing the curb out where they cannot pass.
We're not going to be able to bring the curb out because that'll be the state of Vermont.
Right.
But
I just
you
wonder,
make a good
'cause
point.
it's
I mean,
really-
it's illegal to pass there. People do it all the time.
All the time. Yep.
So you make a good
Okay.
point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry?
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments. First, to commend Jane, and I see Dorothy and Jim, and I'm sure I may be missing a few, but this is a volunteer group that over a period of several years has met routinely and religiously every week or two to design and conduct these various demonstrations. I think it's a fantastic effort that has benefited the entire community and deserves a lot of thanks from those of us who are going to benefit. We have some further accomplishments to look forward to. Along the way, the committee has established a very positive working relationship with town staff. Joe, the town manager, has taken the lead. It's an exemplary effort, conducted mainly, if not wholly, by volunteers, and it deserves every credit that you can award it. We're looking forward to, in budget, for yet another step to be taken, and that is jointly with the Bike and Pedestrian Committee to propose some projects. And while we look forward to that in December, I just wanted to comment at this point of how fortunate we are to have this effort. And thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Anyone else?
I agree, thank you. It's such a great example of a grassroots group coming together to address a community concern that sort of, from what I could gather, started to materialize over Front Porch Forum at some level, right? People just observing that, hey, cars are driving fast here, what can we do about it? And it's just great. Thank you for all the work on that, and it's very heartening to see the tangible results as you're walking and biking and sometimes driving through the town. So the only other comment is just, I'm sure you're doing this, but the coordination with the Bike Ped Committee is important for all the boards and committees to just always talk and communicate and make sure you're not fighting each other unnecessarily.
No,
So,
that's been a nice addition to our
Yeah.
work, is that collaboration. And thank you. And I just would say that I would just want people to know that we have probably about 12 to 15 members who are regular attenders of our meeting. We have a regular monthly meeting, and then we have a email list of probably about 40 people who have expressed interest, who want to stay updated. So the interest is out there in the work that we're doing, and I do very much appreciate the support we've received from the Select Board and from Joe and Dean and Ann.
Thank you, Jane. Jessica, did you have a comment?
Just quick. I just wanted to say that Joe and I have been working with Helena at Legislative Council, and the interesting part is that she's saying that in statute, we probably can lower the speed limit, but that it's been in practice not that way. And so what we've got VTrans, who's going to be on the phone call as well, to really push on this, because as I've been traveling around, Joe talked to me about this a long time ago, I've been writing down in my car how many little towns you go through that seem to be very a state highway type, and then drop to 25. One of them is right near Mount Philo when you go through that town, and there's always police waiting, and it drops to 25 right there. So, and there's hardly any cars that travel there.
Trying to tell us it's a speed trap?
I don't know about that, but I do know that I've tried to bring all these things up to Helena, it's Helena Gardner, who is working with us from the Ledge Council, and she's great, and she's going back actually and looking at some of the testimony from past times where they talk about this 85% rule.
Yeah, I hate to get into weeds too much, but without question, I mean, we have the ability to lower the speed limit today, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But then the more important question is it then enforceable?
Right.
We can't be putting our police officers, for example, in a position where they can't enforce the ordinance. So there's possibly a disconnect between, yes, the select board can go through the ordinance amendment process and put the speed limit down to 30 or something like that. But that doesn't answer the question necessarily, is it enforceable? And we want to make sure, and maybe with this December 7th call that we have with Helena, that we'll have a little bit better a better feeling that the ordinance would then be enforceable.
Well,
And if it-
what's the issue with enforceability? If, as Jessica says, they're speed traps.
It's all about court, being sued.
But then the I feel like I'm just getting a lot into the weeds
Okay,
here.
that's
But
fine.
that is the question that we're going to
Yeah, we're
try
gonna
to
try and
get
work
better
on.
clarification from Legislative Council on December 7th is our ability to amend the ordinance correspond with our ability to enforce that amended ordinance.
And then to see if it really isn't enforceable, what do we need to do at the legislature, inside of the legislature, to possibly make it enforceable? And Helena's the right person to help us do that because she works with legislators. So we're hoping that we are at the end. We're in the end of this.
Thank you. So let's move on to item number 10.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Wendy. Thank Kevin for us.
Hey, thanks for the high-tech help there.
You like that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff, twice.
Item number 10, consider approving CLC, which is Certified Local Government Grant, on behalf of HPDRC.
Dean is here. Dean is probably the best person to describe this.
I don't have a presentation. I realize that you're about 45 minutes behind schedule. I don't want to short circuit the public. I'd be happy to give you a spiel or answer questions first.
Is it possible to give the 30-second spiel?
I'll try. The town has a credential. It's called the CLG, a status. It's like having letters after your name. Those letters allow the town to apply for grants. The money comes from the federal government. The Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission has accessed that money over the years. They've asked me to prepare an application that would go into the next round of grants. They would like to use that money to pay for the preparation of a document called the National Register nomination. It's the kind of designation, more letters that you see when you drive through some towns and they'll say National Register, on the National Register of Historic Places. That designation can apply to buildings, it can apply to sites, and it can apply to areas. Shelburne already has a designation for the National Register for the village, the area right around here. For many years, the HPDRC has sought to develop an application for the Shelburne Falls area. Several years ago, 3 grad students at UVM prepared a draft. A year or so after that, another grad student took it further. They would like to get it over the finish line. We're estimating it would cost about $9,000. It's money that we have to match. There was money budgeted for the match amount. It would be $3,600 of local funds, about $5,400 of federal funds if we got them. That's like the 2-minute version, Gary.
That's the
2-minute.
I appreciate it. It was good. Anyone have any comments or questions?
Sold.
And this is part of the budget and that was prepared for and passed by voters.
Yeah, I can
the match list.
show copies of the existing nomination that we have. Some of what's happening is that the feds change their requirements or their allowances. They will allow things to be digital. One reason why it was never finished before is there wasn't enough money to print the photos, which had to be in black and white in a certain format. We couldn't get them all printed. Well, now the photographs will have to be taken again, but they can be on a compact disc or a thumb drive. They can be just digital.
So the motion you're looking for, is it for the Select Board Chair to sign the application, or is it for the Historic Preservation and Design Review Committee's
It would be
chair?
to authorize the grant application and to authorize the chair to sign. I have
The chair of the
of this body, in addition to the chair of the HPDRC, because you both have to sign. The grant
Great.
applications have spaces for.
Would someone like to move what Dean just said?
Sir, moved.
Moved by Jerry. Is there a second?
Second.
Which one of you guys was first?
I'll take it.
You'll take it? Okay, Jamie, second. All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much, Dean. Yeah, I'll sign it right now.
Your spot's there. That's the budget page.
Here you go. Thanks. Next item is item number 11. Update on possible reimbursements for sewer backup claims not fully covered by insurance. Joe, why don't you?
Sure. I was hoping that both Peter Frankenberg and Chris Robinson would be here tonight to provide a little bit more context to this. Unfortunately, they both have reasons that they just were not able to make it. I did put into your packet, the Select Board's packet, a few documents. One, I believe I sent this to the Select Board after the last meeting. I just want to be clear, clarify a comment that was made at the last meeting. when it was said something about the town doesn't have any plans to fix this problem. The town is fixing the problem in terms of replacing that manhole. So that is happening. And just to address the issue about infiltration in a sewer system, generally speaking, I mean, that is just part of the deal with sewer systems. That doesn't necessarily mean poor management or anything else like that, but especially with older systems, you'll find it all over New England. Infiltration happens with relative frequency with sewer systems. The other email there is one I sent from Peter Frankenberg, our finance director, who certainly has more context and more years of service with the town than any of us. And I think he provides some reasonable things to consider before making a determination by the board. Unfortunately, I don't think that we're any closer now than we were maybe 2 weeks ago to having a decision point with the board, but we'll keep working on it.
Thank you. Any comments by anyone on the board?
Yeah,
Before I open it up?
I'd like to comment about my recusal. You may remember that at the last meeting, I recused myself early in the discussion. And it's to kind of clarify my role on the PACIF board. I don't represent the town. We have a board of 13 people statewide, and I feel badly, Mr. Webster, that I didn't kind of follow up with you specifically because you raised the question. And those of us who serve from communities all over the state. So it's not a representation of Shelburne as such. The fact that I'm from Shelburne and that Joe, who sits on another board, is also from Shelburne is we hope, some credit to the community, but we don't represent the town there. I've spent some time considering my recusal, which I think frankly was an excess of prudence at the start, and at this point feel I can be objective and I'm not conflicted to continue the discussion of this whole matter.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody have anything to say about that?
I don't know about that, but what I'd like to know is, based on the comments from the last meeting, what do we know what the status of repairs that have been done in the houses that were affected? Because that seems to be that's my biggest concern, is that if people have suffered damage, and the town has a responsibility in whatever that responsibility is, I think getting those homes repaired sooner than later is the responsible thing to do. Although I recognize from Peter's comments that we don't need to walk into the self-insurance business, but that's one question. And the second question is, which was brought up before, is do you anticipate, or what do you think the chance is of the town being involved in any lawsuits, whether it's passive? We don't have any idea.
I wouldn't be able to predict that. So, I'm just thinking about going forward of how the board wants to deal with this. Sometimes the board, we won't have this down as a decision item. This doesn't need to happen today. We'll nominate a member to kind of represent the board going forward. I wish I had a perfect idea of how we can keep working on this. Some of this is we're just waiting for other legal actions to take its course. I want to be as helpful and be as responsive as possible to the homeowners. I also am sensitive that there's kind of a process that's here that is not necessarily that we're in control of. So, I guess I'll just ask the board, hey, going forward, do you want to nominate one of the next meeting, someone to, you tell me.
I mean, to me, I feel like we've talked about being in fact-finding mode, and I haven't quite seen us articulate what exactly we're trying to answer, and that would be helpful. There are some good questions here from Peter and others, but I think we first have to put that on a page, is what do we need to know before we can get to a decision point? And whether or not the insurance coverage litigation is part of that or not, I think is a consideration for the board to decide. It may not be to some, it may be to others, I don't
Even if we
know.
had a working piece of the issues, since they're multiple, just identify what, among the several issues, where we stand on them and what the resolution is potentially, including those that we're not going to be
Yeah, I
resolving.
mean, I don't think there's an issue necessarily if, at the end of the day, passive becomes the responsible party. Then this board, I think there's no issue here. But
Even with the tenants?
If passive is not the responsible body, and I don't know when that final determination is going to be made, that's when this board potentially has a decision to make.
Just for explanation, we're referring to this board in this
Sorry.
capacity, really not as the select board,
The sewer board.
but as the sewer commissioners. Because by statute, we are also serving in that role. Our charter provides for a separate board for water, but we serve for sewer.
So could you, as Jamie, I think, has made good points, can you get us the information about the status of the repairs necessary from the houses and where that stands in the
I'll do
scheme
my
of things?
best to circle back with all the neighbors and have that information.
I think that's helpful. I think Jamie makes a good point. We're in fact-finding mode. But there's a second part, too, and that is providing guidance for the board as to what, if any, obligation this board has. And this goes to what Peter's email was, what our obligation might be in regard to this. So that's a part that I think's critical. Are we serving a proprietary or are we serving a governmental role here? There's different standards that are applicable. And so, I see you, Chris, I'll get you a second. And so I think it's really two parts. What are the facts, and then what are our obligations so we know how to apply those facts?
Yeah, I also think there's some urgency, right? I think we should sort of get after this. If they
and
raise the issue in
and that's
June
the-
and it's mid-November.
Yeah,
And
that's the tough part.
And that's what I realize. I realize that there's an urgency here on my part. I mean, I want to help out as much as possible. Certainly the homeowners have the most urgency. This board has urgency. And the problem is, I don't know how quickly we can push this along. So I'm trying to be realistic about how quickly a resolution can come forward.
Okay.
But I'm mindful of all that.
Dr. Metz, I'll get to you, but first, Mr. Boyd had his hand up, okay?
Folks, so just to give a little background, 26 years ago or so, I worked with Kevin Wooster down to Fire District Number 2. I've wore a few different hats in my life. And when I first went to work with Kevin, it was through the Prudential Committee. I don't know if any of you remember that whole function. And the fire district really wasn't part of the town government. Kevin had spoken with Jack Stevens and other board members then about the lower part of Hillside, Shelburne Avenue, Green Hills Drive. There were portions of those collection systems that were poorly installed, very flat. Shelburne Avenue, for example, or La Platte Circle, is masonry and brick manhole covers or basins that were falling apart then. This is 26 years ago. And to my understanding, nothing's been really done other than in Lower Hillside, the line itself was relined, not replaced, but was relined and the bottom of the basins relined. But the basins were not replaced. So 26 years ago, it was being argued with the Prudential Committee. And then when the town took over, I know until I left, Kevin was arguing very hard about the concerns and repeated plugs we would have to go over to La Platte Circle regularly every spring and flush that line so the grease would be out of it. There was a lot of extra maintenance that went into those old systems that need to be replaced. If they're getting to the point to where they're backing up in people's homes to this degree, the town's, you know, unfortunately, you folks end up inheriting it from years of somebody else's not doing something.
Maybe you can
but-
reach out to Joe and give him some of the
Yeah,
history
it'd be nice to
privately,
have some of that
that could be
history.
helpful.
I'll reach out to you,
To him,
Chris.
because what you're really getting down to, the issue is the town's obligation. Has the town been negligent? And I can't answer that from a factual standpoint because I don't know, and I don't think we know that at this time. And I can tell you in my brief research, there's 3 facets where negligence can come into play in these areas, and that's the design, then it's the operation, and it's the maintenance. So, and then we have insurance. So those are the issues that we have to flush out to find out what our obligation is, apply the facts to that obligation to find out, is the town responsible? Because if there is a responsibility, then it's going to be borne by all the sewer users. They're the ones who pay for it, not the town, the sewer users. If there isn't an obligation, and I'm not coming out either way because I simply don't know. If there isn't an obligation, would it be correct for all the sewer users to pay for a problem that's not all their obligation? That's where it comes down to. It's trying to make that determination. And I think what Joe has told us is we don't have the facts to go on. And I don't want anyone to rely on that quick summary of what the obligation is, because that literally was, you know, I spent a half an hour researching it. And there should be more than that to it. So, Dr. Metz, then Dorothy afterwards.
So tonight I sat here and listened to a wonderful report about how we had money to help all kinds of people. We had money to help people lock up their medicines and all of that. We were very it was very gracefully extended. Now we have people who are residents of Shelburne who are living with raw sewage in their homes. These people are residents of Shelburne, just like the people that needed money to lock up their medicines. And they're living with some very, very bad conditions. And they're Shelburne residents. And they're hooked up to Shelburne Sewer Department. And so, in my view, I don't understand what is so complicated about fact-finding. Go to the people who are having raw sewage backed up into their homes and ask them a few simple questions. When did it happen? How many times? Because you may or may not know that some of these people have had repeated episodes of sewage coming into their homes. This isn't a one-time thing. You say that you've repaired the problem. You haven't repaired the problem. The problem is old pipes that were relined, but they weren't replaced. Don't shake your head, sir.
I don't think that's exactly right, Dr. Metz.
I know that these pipes have not been replaced. They've been relined. And these pipes are, as Mr. Boyd said, very, very elderly. And if nothing were wrong, fine. But there's something very wrong about people who are residents of Shelburne, pay for sewer service, and have raw sewage coming into their homes. It won't do to say that it happens all over New England. It's happening here in Shelburne, and you folks are the sewer board. So you have some responsibility. And you can draw it out however long you want, but you still have people living here that are living in very bad conditions. And if you don't have a legal obligation, you have a moral obligation, in my view.
Thank you, Dr. Metz. Dorothea, Ms. Sawyer, you had your hand. Would you like to come to the microphone?
don't have a question. I don't want to ask a question. What I'd like to say is, there isn't one person on this board tonight that's going home to a house that smells of poop. And we have money here somehow. We have a discretionary fund for this. We have something for that. We're going to pay for a library. All good things. You can't tell me that you cannot find a few bucks to help these people. If they need a new skim coat of concrete on the basement floor, we can do it. You can't ask people to live in this hoity-toity town that we're all so proud of, to live with sewage in their basement. Every one of you have some professional ability. I work at a construction office. I have some idea of what concrete is and how bad it smells when it's full of shit. So somehow among you all, we can figure a way. If it's $500, and as far as saying that the sewage users shouldn't pay for this, we pay for everything. We do it gladly. We have fundraisers. We have GoFund. I even really thought about starting a GoFundMe for those people, just to give them some relief. You see the thing that says Surf Pro like it never happened? This happened. We can fix it. I'm not a cheerleader. I'm just saying it isn't just your responsibility, but none of you is going home to this problem. So wouldn't you go home tonight and say, how the hell am I going to fix this for these people? I'll chip in $50. I'm an old lady. I'm still working 40 hours a week. But I would chip in anything. If you could figure out a way that we can help them, never mind the cities and league and towns, whatever it is. This is our problem. We can fix it. So I'm not asking a question. I'm just making a statement. Now, whether you like it or not, it's a fact. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Sarr.
Yes, John Sarr, Harbour Road. I'd just like to commend the previous two speakers, and I think that they spoke for the town extremely well. This is shameful. Shameful that these people have been living with ordure, and the town sits on its hands and talks about the law and the insurers. Fix the problem. It's our system. We all pay for it. We're responsible. Fix it, please.
Is there anyone else? Please.
Ryan Vagnon, 366 Hillside. I'm one of the four houses involved. And first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for taking this to the next step. I do want to say that, and this has been reiterated by a few other people, this is a service that we pay for. There's a history of backup incidents in our neighborhood. I'm required to use the system. I have no other option. It failed, and I'm being held financially responsible for that. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ryan. Please.
I agree with you, Joe, that it would be helpful if Chris was here, but it's part of the fact-finding part of this, and I don't disagree with any of the speakers here, and I think that echoes what I said initially, that it seems like something we have a responsibility for. But sort of long-term, this whole idea that, we have an old system that needs to be worked on. I know we passed a $3 million bond issue for sewer issues. I know there's concern, questions about the different sewer plants. Do we have a long-term plan for those kinds of?
Absolutely. I mean, and again, I apologize. And Chris certainly feels bad about not being here, but that just couldn't happen, and that would have really helped out, put some context to this entire discussion. So, but yeah, and the budget that you passed, including with the capital fund, with the sewer budget back in May or whenever it was, absolutely had that. Chris would be able to talk to you quite a bit more about the repairs that are planned and that have been made. And I want to be clear. I don't mean for this to come off in any other way besides just a statement of fact. If I had the authority, I would have, tried to fix the problem with these homeowners immediately, but that's not something that I can do. And it got a little bit more complicated at the last minute because of the litigation between homeowners insurance and passive. So things happened at awkward times that just made this maybe more difficult and more frustrating to deal with as quickly as we would have liked. Having said that, I definitely want to get on this as quickly as possible and have a resolution.
Okay, let me ask you, what do you suggest in order to get on it and have a resolution as quickly as possible?
I think that it works out well at this point. We do this with some other similar issues that come before the board when there's maybe a negotiation to be had or something like that. I think it might be helpful if the board appoints a point person that I know that I can work with and that the neighbors can work with on this. I think that might help push it forward. I don't know.
I'd be happy to do that.
Are you guys good?
Yeah.
Jamie?
So, well, I think it's not listed as a decision item, but I think you could.
Is it an
Maybe that's
appointment on
enough.
behalf of the sewer commission or the board? Both?
Well, it's
Doesn't matter.
one and the same.
Yeah.
It's one and the same, but it's
Yeah.
in wearing our sewer commission hats.
Okay.
So,
And then Jamie can help
so
between me and the homeowners
So what
and,
we've been-
and staff.
we'd
to-
be doing is authorizing Jamie to, as our representative, to work with staff in order to address this issue as reasonably and expeditiously as possible.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
And he'd have authority then to also meet directly with the neighbors and to kind of work with all parties to find a solution. That'd
Okay.
be very helpful.
Great. Someone like to make a motion to that effect, or you want me to make the motion, or?
Well, I just comment that it's not a decision item.
Yeah, we're not deciding whether to cover costs on this. We're deciding, we're appointing someone to
Okay,
serve.
I'm just pointing out that.
Don't you want to do it?
Oh, I'm happy to do it. I'm just pointing out, I'm just trying to verbalize consistency amongst board actions. So that's fine.
Mr. Sarr?
Really impatient. I'm sorry to come back and voice it again. Why can't the town meet its responsibilities, pay for the repairs, and then sue the insurance companies if we have to? It is our responsibility collectively. Let's fix it, not talk about it anymore.
That could be a solution that Jamie brings back to the board.
Right?
Does that work for? Okay. Good. Well, we'll start working on it tomorrow. Good.
Gail?
Can we put a timeline on the resolution of this?
Well, I think it's going to be fact determinative in what we find out. I mean, if we find out tomorrow that we have all the facts, then we can have a meeting right away. If we find out 3 weeks from now, then we address it then. I can't tell you when we're going to get the facts. We don't have the facts.
Well, we'll do it as quickly as possible.
I'm just suggesting, following up on what Mr. Sarr just said, that isn't there a way that the town can address something through an emergency fund that doesn't take responsibility so that it doesn't put the town at risk if there's some kind of an insurance decision, but an emergency fund that, much like the social service fund, that can be authorized to help these folks?
Could be a possibility.
It is. I mean, our finance director has cautioned us in an email that says self-insuring claims such as this establishes a precedent for similar occurrences in the future and could lead to significant expenses. And he has a whole email which is available to anybody who wants to see it. So our finance director has some concerns here. So does somebody want to move to appoint Jamie as the board's representative to work with staff and to meet with homeowners or take whatever steps he feels reasonable to try to move this along expeditiously.
Sure, so moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Who's seconding that? Jerry.
Jerry? All right, thank you. Next item up is item 12, update on the Select Board's review conduct vis-à-vis the former police chief. Joe, this was, came up at a meeting that you had suggested, give or take a month ago.
Could I just weigh in?
Yes, please.
On my recusal on this, following Jerry's update on the prior item. I have thought a little bit more about this. I was appointed 2 weeks ago and literally sat down in the chair for less than an hour and then had to leave the room. So it happened very quickly, and I think out of an abundance of caution, it made sense to leave the room, given that the topic was sort of moving all over the place at that time. So as I think about it, I think, the conflict that I have that I disclosed with my wife and her firm really does relate to the separation agreement and the chief's retirement, which is a matter that there's no longer ongoing representation, so to speak, with respect to that by the firm. To me, I sort of see this as, if we're talking about process going forward, then I don't see a conflict whatsoever, and I don't really see a need to be disqualified from the conversation if we're talking about best practices to develop a process for similar situations that don't relate back to an individual, let's say. So in that respect, it felt to me like these are two different issues, and I do feel like I could add value to the process piece of it, and in a fair, objective, and impartial manner. So I wanted to put that out for consideration by the board and to everyone in the room.
Okay. Anyone on the board have any thoughts?
Makes perfect sense to me.
No, I think that's a sensible position as well.
Okay. Dr. Metz has comment.
Thank you. I'm anxious to have Mr. Hines' common and objective observations. However, I'm hoping that the scope of this, can I use the word investigation, or is that not correct? If it's an investigation or a fact-finding, whatever you choose to call it, I'm hoping that we learn from from process that has already been. So I'm hoping we're going to go back in time and review what took place before we can draw conclusions as to what needed, if anything, what needs, if anything, to be done to change that process. So I just bring this out that I'm hoping this process, this investigation, this fact-finding, whatever it needs to be called, will include a review of what took place. I don't know if that changes your thinking, but I'm hoping very, very intently, excuse me, that it will include a review, because a lot of people, well, there aren't that many, but many people sitting in this room are hoping that we will clarify and find out exactly how this process played out.
No, those are fair points. I think time will tell, in my opinion, as we start to scope out whatever this discrete body of work may be, right? And if there are 3 members of this board that decide there's merit to looking backwards and going into that, then so be it. And I'll step out of the room if that becomes a topic before the board. But going forward, I really do think there's a distinction to be made about developing new process for a similar situation without reflecting back to a particular individual or a discrete set of facts. So, and I'm willing to revisit this at any time if it becomes an issue in the public's mind.
All right, Joe, this was originally something you brought up at a meeting. Yeah, I'll get to it in a second. Joe, you originally brought this up. Do you have something you'd, I was going to ask you to introduce this
Sure.
matter. So, go ahead.
Okay, I did bring it up. Josh might have brought it up originally back in August, and then I brought it up again a few weeks ago. I don't remember how long it was, just because the issue kept coming up. And, you know, certainly, like I said, when I originally brought it up, I would welcome the critique and criticism that might come along with it. And I also was maybe hoping that there would be some clarification on what happened, because I still feel that, you know, maybe the facts weren't fairly shown from my dealing with the matter. So, having said that, so I would still welcome the review. I meant that sincerely when I brought it up. I later received I think between the last meeting and this one, I don't know if Jamie received this, because at the time I thought he had recused himself, that the town attorney did express some significant concerns about the select board moving forward on any sort of investigation into this matter, because I think there is a significant concern that would be nearly impossible, if not impossible, to do without bumping up with the separation agreement itself, which that cannot happen per the terms of the agreement. So his recommendation, I know, to the board was that, you know, it's a great idea. Unfortunately, he did not feel that it was the right thing to do to move forward on this.
Thank you. Anyone on the board have anything they'd like to add?
Well, we have another communication today. Is that going to be addressed?
Another one today?
From me,
Yeah.
that's fair. I think the board received a communication from me today. I'm guessing that's what Jerry wants to bring up.
Okay. Which communication are you referring to?
From Mr. Lambert.
Oh, okay. Sure, if you want to bring it up, go ahead.
Well, I'm afraid we're being a little mysterious. Maybe not deliberately, but I think that's the effect. So I'm willing to make a few comments. We were preparing to as you heard at the last meeting, to scope tonight this review. I'm aware of the semantic differences that can be expressed in calling it an investigation or an examination or an inquiry, blah, blah, blah. We simply have addressed it as a review. And spent, some of us with Joe, a considerable amount of time trying to design the best structure for it, trying to anticipate what problems we might run into. You'll recall some concerns we even expressed at the last meeting about stepping in the puddle of the agreement and trying to avoid that, so on and so forth. With some of you, I've even shared and exchanged some emails on the same subject. What has changed in recent days is counsel from the town attorney to the effect that he has cautioned us in extreme fashion not to pursue this review for the certainty that it will trespass or bump into or step into, however you want to phrase it, the settlement agreement. He just simply has advised us as town attorney to the select board that in his estimate, you can't conduct this successfully or for any period of time before you inevitably and invariably are going to involve the settlement agreement itself, which we've all discussed as being confidential and I think most of us agree must remain confidential. It in fact binds the town and the chief to confidentiality. With that opinion in hand, a board member, speaking for myself, can only responsibly go along with that counsel. As disappointed, greatly disappointed, as I am and have been for a few days, it just does not seem workable for us to pursue this review. So lest there be any mystery about what you're hearing tonight, you're hearing the closure of the idea, which none of you are going to regret more than me, and I'm sure some of my colleagues, and I'm sure Joe himself, who originally volunteered this altogether as an initiative. Now, there have been further developments
Today?
today.
I brought the letter, if you want to refer
Okay.
to it, and I brought, because I wasn't sure if it was going to come up. I realize it's a public record, so I did bring it.
I think it would be very useful, Joe, to at least review it so that the public understands what additional issues we are facing at the moment. And then I have a comment that did not anticipate that, but bears to it, and I hope I can make that.
So, Joe, you want to?
Well, I wasn't gonna read this aloud. I brought copies if it came up. It's a public record. I recognize that.
If you could hand it out, because I do have a question that I could ask.
Here are extra copies. You can pass it. I think the letter
You want to just do a little summary,
speaks for
Joe?
itself.
or
I mean, do you want me
just
to,
one
I
page?
can read it, if that would just be easier. It's not long, although it's kind of strange to read something in the third person.
It is, it is.
No, but I think it would be useful. It's public record, and I think it would be useful for those attending.
Okay. I am going to read it in the third person, as embarrassing as that sounds, but
Why don't you identify
I
who
will.
it's from and who it's to?
yeah. So this is from Bernie Lambeck. He's an attorney with Zallinger, Cameron, and Lambeck from Montpelier. Dear Shelburne Select Board, I represent Joe Colangelo. As you may imagine, the present climate in Shelburne is deeply troubling to Joe. There's a sharp division within the Select Board and among town residents revolving around a number of ongoing issues, and a lot of vitriol has been expressed, some of it aimed directly at the town manager. Nasty comments about Joe have appeared in social media for months. In at least one instance, a Facebook posting that weirdly and falsely castigated Joe for pushing out more town people that are in his way was liked by a member of the town ethics committee. Joe does not deserve this treatment. Some residents are evidently dismayed about personnel actions regarding the former police chief, but in this case, Joe was fulfilling his responsibility as manager and is not in position to publicly respond to the criticism. The attacks aimed at Joe on this topic are especially unwarranted because the Select Board had been briefed on this matter all along and played an active role in the resolution with the police chief, at least in part through the board's engagement of a town attorney to reach a settlement. A principal reason for public misperceptions about the respective institutional roles is that during the August 22nd board meeting, Select Board member Josh Dean denied that the board had any knowledge of or involvement in decisions relating to the police chief's position until, quote, the Select Board was presented with a settlement agreement signed by the chief. But public records show that the Select Board was informed promptly about this matter by Joe, and during the course of 2 executive sessions, the entire Select Board worked together to craft and unanimously approve the separation agreement. At no time did any member of the Select Board suggest that they had any concerns about Joe's conduct, the process used, or decisions he made until Mr. Dean stated publicly at the same August 22nd meeting that a review should be conducted. A petition was circulated among the public calling for Joe's removal for his handling of the matter. Disparaging and false statements continued to be made against him, and one town resident, himself a member of the ethics committee, even filed a baseless ethics complaint against Joe, which was properly dismissed by the Ethics Committee on September 5th as lacking for probable cause. The alleged ethics violation was the process used in the personnel action involving the former police chief. Evidently, misleading statements made during the August 22nd Select Board meeting placed a target on Joe's back. With good reason, Joe believes the current environment has put his job and reputation in serious jeopardy. Section 20 of Joe's employment agreement requires that each party act in good faith and that the parties resolve any differences at the lowest possible level. To be true to the contract, the Select Board should have talked to Joe privately about any possible concerns before doing so in such a public fashion. To be clear, this letter is not a threat of litigation, nor is it an opening salvo that is intended to lead to litigation. But we are asking the Select Board to take note of Joe's concerns and to take positive steps to improve the climate. We acknowledge that during this October 10, 2017 board meeting, Chair Gary Von Stange did make helpful remarks to clarify the situation. However, we think more can be done. We just respectfully request a public correction of the record regarding the board's knowledge of and involvement in the decisions leading to the settlement with the police chief and issuance of a clear statement that Joe's conduct, professionalism, and integrity were never questioned by the Select Board. I know you have a lot on your plate. Nonetheless, we would be grateful for your prompt consideration reply.
This letter was sent, I think it was the middle of the afternoon today, to the Select Board and copied to the town attorney. And to my knowledge, no one on the board had seen it beforehand. So, Jerry, did you want to make your comment?
Well, I'm an amateur, gang. But it seems to me we have yet another constraint to observe, which we obviously will want to observe. And we're left with an essential question, which I'm sure Shannon is going to repeat tonight, which seems to me even more distant from us at the moment in terms of being able to respond to it for what are perhaps more understandable reasons. I think there is information specific to the 3 board meetings during which this matter was introduced. It was discussed as a response to a communication from the chief's attorney, and in the third case, since that response arrived as an agreed settlement, discussed in some minor detail, and that night voted. That process could certainly, it seems to me, be described for you and might satisfy what concerns have been expressed about, quote unquote, the process followed. That, however, does not involve the process which culminated in a letter to the chief, which we have described forever as being confidential, and in fact, which none of us have read or seen. It does not account for the events following the agreement and the board vote to approve it, which many of us have noted were less than what might have been expected at the retirement of a long-serving department head in this town. But I do think we should continue to try, not only in the interest of those who have come meeting after meeting to express concerns, not only in the interest of the chief himself, but in the interest of Joe, in this case, to illuminate what we can, when we can, however we can. And to that extent, I'm going to repeat a comment that I expected to make. Sometimes you rehearse these things in your mind at night. If it's doesn't sound rehearsed, I'll excuse myself. But this was before the letter came from the attorney Joe has engaged. And that comment is that there was full involvement of the board, and in my recollection, the whole board, in the 3 meetings that culminated in the third with an agreement to approval of the agreement. So that it just simply cannot be said, nor implied, nor mistaken because the reference might be mistaken altogether, that the board was not engaged in the final agreement as the final settlement agreement as it was finally approved. No, I don't think we should continue to dwell on things that we can talk about at the expense of doubt and discredit of things that we can't discuss. And I appeal to all of you at the moment to understand that this is now a more complicated matter than it was at the start. A simple idea of a review of process does not any longer seem workable or doable. And I think it's in the continuing interest of the town manager and the town and this board that when we and as we can discuss this at public meetings, we do. And I thank you.
Thank you. Josh, you said you had a question or a comment?
Well, yeah, I think I can just follow up on Jerry's comments, which I think pretty much mirror some of mine. I think the second to last paragraph in the letter, I think really states what the conundrum is on this issue, where there is a request to a public correction of the board's knowledge and involvement in the decisions, which I think Jerry just did, leading to the settlement. But the second part was the issuance of a clear statement that Joe's conduct, professionalism, and integrity were never questioned by the select board. I think that's a true statement as well, because there's nothing, here we need to make a very clear separation between actions taken by Joe, of which the town, the select board, had no knowledge of, in any of the dealings with Chief Warden. So I don't think this board has ever made any comments about Joe's conduct because it's not something we could actually review. We knew nothing about it. And I think the third paragraph where I mentioned that denying that the board had any knowledge of involvement about the decisions relating to the police chief position is an accurate statement. We did not know anything about this until it was brought before the select board as an issue. And the only, I think the quoted comment might be taken somewhat out of context because there were meetings authorizing the town attorney to enter into settlement agreements, but there were certainly questions about how this came to be. But the concept later on in that paragraph that the select board worked together to craft and approve to craft the settlement agreement, I certainly wouldn't agree with. Certainly there were questions asked and there were opinions offered, but the select board did not play any role in, quote, crafting the agreement per se. I would say use that verb to say involved in making language. What we did was offer opinions and authorize the town attorney to work with the chief's attorney to come upon a settlement agreement, which is what the process that happened. So I'm not sure there is a whole heck of a lot else that is unknown other than the actions taken up until the point where the select board was made aware that this was an issue.
I'm sorry, that's just not accurate. Not accurate.
All right. I realize, Jamie, you weren't part of the select board at this time. Lucky for you. And I join in most, if not all, of Jerry's comments. I just can't remember every word you said. The board did participate and did know things as we went along, so I'm going to disagree with Josh's
Which
comments.
things did we need to know? That's what I'd
But
like
I'm
to
going to
know.
also point out in the agreement, I'm not going to read the sections, and it's called a separation agreement and release, just to be clear. It's not necessarily a settlement agreement. It serves a very similar purpose. I direct everyone's attention to Section 1, or Article 1, subsection 4, the second paragraph of Article 2, the 7th article, and the 12th article. Rather than taking up everyone's time, this is online, everyone can read it. So I'm not going to comment further on this. We have at least 3 people who want to speak. Who wants to go first? Mr. Moran.
So, firstly, I'd like to thank you for reading the letter. We can talk about the dramatic effect later, but I thought it was well done. And I was glad for the letter, and I'll tell you why. It comes down, and this plays into Section 16 also. It comes down to respect. And this whole incident was the slippery slope that the select board slid down in losing the respect of the town. It's not given away. You can't buy it at Sharper Image, and you can't buy it at Neiman Marcus. You have to earn it. And I think you did once have it, but you don't now. And I think it's going to take a lot to build that back. Often in these meetings, it was said, we knew nothing of this situation until the separation agreement. The chair said it.
That's incorrect.
You can go back and look at the tape. You said it, sir. Go back and look at the tape. Well, you can say it's incorrect till you're blue in the face. I looked at the tape. No, I'm staying within the 3 minutes. So in a way, this vindicated Joe to a certain degree, and I'm glad for that because it also put the select board on notice. You know, when you have a select board that dances around the truth, when you have a select board that, brings ranting against the fire chief and then is going to sue the town because they don't like being under ethics review, the respect just diminishes. And you wonder why. You're going to talk about conduct and all this. You folks were selected by us. You have a higher standard of conduct and respectability that you've certainly lost. And come March, and Jamie, this is nothing in you just joined. Okay. That's going to change, and we hope it will. Because at some point, I don't know if this select board ever worked well together. I have a feeling it hasn't. New people have to sit in those chairs, and the select board will once again have the respect of the town.
Mr. Sarr?
Well, that was the sad truth for all of us, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that much of what we've heard tonight from the board is a smokescreen, in that it was focused almost entirely on everything that happened after the chief's dismissal. And we're really not interested in that. I mean, we're satisfied that you and the chief came to an agreement, and it was a lot of money, but at least he left with an appropriate compensation. That does not compensate him for the loss of his reputation, and that goes to the very heart of this. The inception of the problem was the dismissal of the chief on a sham charge. And that was a wrong, and everyone should have known that immediately. Now, the chairman has denied that he knew of it in advance. Joe has implied tonight, he hasn't said so specifically, but he has implied that that may not be the truth. But you do have to deal with the problem as is and not try to brush it under the rug one more time.
Ms. Warden.
So I thank everybody for their comments. Joe, I can certainly appreciate where you're coming from and the vulnerability that this has put you in. And Jamie, thank you for rethinking your recusal. Certainly, should the review had gone forward, a thorough review would have involved interviews. That interview would have involved my father, who would have had counsel present.
Of course.
And thus there would have been a conflict there. Jamie, you talk about process. I think the problem, the frustration and angst amongst folks out here who don't know exactly what happened is that it's not clear to them what process was followed for the suspension to occur. And that goes back to those documents that I was talking about before, where you're trying to flesh out your new personnel policy. You had an old one, circa 84 or whatever. I was 3 years old at the time. And it's not clear if that was being followed for the suspension or the state statute that's supposed to be followed for police officers or the town charter. So I think that's where a lot of this frustration is coming from, that there was a suspension and then it got rescinded, but nobody knew how that suspension was arrived at, what was the process of. So I can understand that frustration and that wanting to know, to be able to put some closure to this. The most important thing is that the suspension was removed. I do believe that the progressive discipline process was in the initial, the 1984 or whatever, personnel policy. I'm going to go back to that you folks have a lot of work to do to look at process here. And Chris Boyd at the last meeting talked about looking at other suspensions or disciplinary actions, whether it was in the police department or other departments, to look at patterns or similarities and ways to tighten up the system. I do it in my business. People do it in other businesses. That's what you do, is you look for improvements to clean up the process and then communicate that process so it's clear for people going forward. And somebody else said, that my dad left, and he was compensated well and he left. I can speak for him when I say that that was not important to him. My father has not been to Harrington's since he was suspended, a place that he liked to go, and groups of people that he got to know in this community for 30 years. And he, I believe, is ashamed to come into this town because of what happened. 30 years. That's 30 years of building relationships of generations. Kids that he watched grow up. Kids that he worked with on their graduation challenges from CVU and then go on to graduate high school, or better yet, go on and become police officers. Full circle. He had plans to retire at the end of this fall or early this winter. He had an appointment with Femurs in September to get everything all his ducks in a row for retirement. And this is what happened to his career. all the money in the world doesn't fix that. Doesn't fix the fact that when I drive through Shelburne, I put my cruise control on because I am so worried that I have a target on my back as well. And that my father has not been to any establishment in Shelburne to see his friends of 30 years since he was suspended. And it was his choice to tell the department that he was suspended. That was his choice. He didn't have to disclose that because it was a personnel matter, but he did, because that's transparency, and that's what a good leader does, especially in his line of work when you're working side by side with people who literally have to have your back in life and death situations. You're transparent with one another because it could be the matter of life and death. So when you're thinking about process and you're having reviews, don't have reviews, you want to throw around attorney this, attorney that, I want you to think about the person. The person that this affected the most. And these people sitting out here, they're the only ones that have been thinking about the person. And that's why they come week after week.
If I can just say one word, a couple words. I don't know how Shannon got up here and said that, but she added humanity to what we've all been feeling for these last months, and I hope you received that. The word is respect. So many problems, whether it's here, in town, on the job. Quite often it just boils down to respect.
Anyone on the board have any comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, what I'd like to know, and Shannon, if you'd like to speak, or anyone else, is given all of that's happened here, all of the statements that have made, both by the board and by the audience, what do you think, does anybody have any ideas of, as Sean says, how that respect could be re-earned, if that's the case? Or what would it take to actually provide satisfactory closure? Because, I mean, we can go back and forth many times about what happened, what not happened. But I think there needs to be some kind of, whether it's possible or not, I can't say. I certainly can't speak for the board. But I certainly would have an interest in having some sense of what would provide closure to this affair.
Okay. Anyone else have anything? Mr. Boyd?
So I'm glad the letter came forward because I'd been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, and for someone to come in and do a review or whatever it was going to be called, with the file being expunged of all details because of the agreement, just thinking about it more and more, I was like, how is a person ever going to follow a trail? Other than, as Shannon said, interviews. And that's going to just rip the scab off for a lot of different people. So I'm glad the letter came out and it puts it to rest. And maybe to build on what you talked about a little bit. Everybody understands. Nothing can be said about anything in the agreement. But last time, one question was asked by Shannon. And if that was answered, maybe that would show a good faith step. Who was the person talking with the town attorney giving the direction? That one answer, not what was said, who was the person talking with the town attorney? Fess up, that'd be a good first step to good faith.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who has anything?
Yeah, I'll answer that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that too.
It's the board.
I'll answer that. No, it wasn't one person. It was the whole board. A proposal was received. It was responded to. The town attorney took that information and negotiated the response, the proposals as received, the proposals as countered, and came back in week 3 at a board meeting with an agreement that at that point happened to have been okayed. It was the whole board. It wasn't any one individual. So far as I know, that was the process followed.
So, and I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if you remember the last time the question was asked, it was posed, there were multiple communications in the course of single days at some times with things going back and forth.
That was something that Shannon mentioned, but that may relate to that side that may relate to communications between the chief and his attorney, potentially.
Well, if his attorney is
Of
receiving...
which we would have no knowledge.
Right, if his attorney's receiving multiple communications from the town attorney... I'm sure the town attorney's not coming back and talking with the whole board multiple times in a day.
Then the question's answered, isn't it?
So who was the single person?
I don't know what you keep referring to as a single person, Chris. I mean, it was a board.
Ultimately, it was a board decision. Or communication.
Yeah, I guess I'm just baffled.
But during that, well, yeah.
I think the question that Chris is asking was, and I think, and I think Jerry is correct in saying there were directions given to, or not directions, but a conversation. If there was additional communication after the meeting in which the town attorney was authorized to engage in negotiation or discussion amongst attorneys, certainly to my knowledge, there was no further board activity. There was no, certainly, from my personal knowledge, there was no additional select board activity. I can't say anything else other than what I know.
All right, I do want to clarify. I've been accused of saying things. This has happened multiple times, and I've tried to clarify this a couple of times, and it's part and parcel of the personal attacks that happen over and over again. And you can make all the background noise you want, and you talk about respect. How would you feel if I made those background noises all the time? And how would you feel if I interrupted you while you were speaking constantly? Okay, so here's the thing, what I said. And by the way, I'm not the only person on the board who said this. I think everyone on the board at the time said this. We didn't know of the suspension until after the suspension. We knew and had discussions with Joe, and I made that clear. He mentions it in his letter on October 10th, whatever day it was cited. But I also made it clear on a couple of other, at least one other occasion. That's what I said. We didn't know about the suspension until after the suspension. And I join with Jerry's comments earlier tonight that this board had met many times. I am not going into any details, and I again refer you to those 4 provisions that I cited to in the separation agreement. All right, has everyone had an opportunity to speak? I see you, Dr. Metz. Has everyone had an opportunity to speak at least once? Okay, Dr. Metz, you want to speak again?
Actually, I don't think I spoke at all on this issue.
Oh, okay, please, I'm
So-
sorry then. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So, I'm speechless. I don't sound like I'm speechless, but I just don't know what to say. I certainly can't add anything intelligent to what Shannon said. I only have one question for this board. How could you accept the separation of this public servant who had had such an exemplary record? If I'm wrong about the exemplary record, let it be so. But how could you accept any separation in this manner of this public servant? There's only one way a 30-year faithful employee who had been so exemplary, there's only one way that a separation should occur, and that is an honorable retirement. I don't know how you could have accepted anything else from this exemplary man.
Dr. Metz, the chief was represented by able counsel. He was advised by able counsel.
Don't care about
He
that,
signed the agreement, and everyone on the select board approved the agreement.
That's the very point I'm making.
Okay,
How
thank
could
you.
you approve it? I don't care who represented who. This is a servant of the town for 30 years. How could you?
Mr. Saar, you'd like to, I think you spoke once already on this, right?
Well, you all insist that the board did not know prior to Joe's suspending the chief. But once you found out what Joe had done, you didn't have you did what? Reaction? And ask him to rescind it or reconsider it or something?
Okay, does anyone else have any comments? Tom, if you could please give your full name.
Is this mic on, you think?
I think so.
Tom Tompkins, Falls Road. I think possibly part of our problem is we're seeing our quaint little town of Shelburne gradually working its way to becoming a city of Shelburne. And along that path, we are kind of losing a little bit of our humanity. And I think we may be seeing some of that in these new personnel regulations that are going to get us into the 21st century. So I guess I would caution people to remember that maybe some residents of the town aren't quite comfortable with losing the character of small town Shelburne. And that perhaps could explain some of the animosity and the problems that we're seeing.
Well said, thanks, Tom. All right, please, Ms. Jordan, I think, right? Yes.
Vivian Jordan, Penny Lane, Shelburne. I want to go back to Josh's question about what might help bring things together. And I just think when I make a mistake, my first reaction is, oh, I made a mistake. Maybe I could have done that differently. And I think that's something that we would like to hear a little more often. Even if it's not, maybe you're not sure it's a mistake, but people are misunderstanding. Maybe I could have been a little more clear about that. That's my contribution.
Thank you. All right.
I'd like to respond to Dr. Metz's question. And you said, how could we do this? And I think you have to look at it from the knowledge that you have, and in order to make it, to make that kind of decision. And I remember my thinking at the time was, if the chief wants to retire, why doesn't he just retire? What do we need a settlement about? And that's all I knew. So when that's all you know, that's all you can respond to. I mean, I understand how that may be difficult, but if you're working within the bounds of the rules or the legal structure that we are bound by, there aren't much more you can do.
Josh, I'm sorry, but I just can't let that go by. It's the reason why, apparently, in great reason, why this letter came from an attorney to the select board about your statements and now you're saying that's all you knew. But we had meetings before, and we did talk about things. So, Josh, that's not fair to Joe.
And Gary, if you did not hear what I said, when I reiterated that I think that statement was taken out of the context per se, in that the question, when that question came from the audience, that was the information that was available. I did not say that there had been no further communications, and I think the way you can interpret that is in many different ways. But certainly when I said it, it was not that there was not, until the settlement agreement reached my thing, clearly I knew that that there was a process that followed. So you can interpret it however you want. If you want to try to stick me with something that fits your analysis, fine, go ahead. But, I think everybody recognizes, that many comments have been made that I think clearly have identified what the process was. And I don't think I've at all been inaccurate in describing where my participation in any of that. And I'm not denying it, and I'm not saying there weren't, I'm not sure I can say there were any mistakes were made, because, as I said to Dr. Metz, we're working within an environment that has boundaries about what you can say, what you can't say.
Lisa, you had a comment? Welcome.
Lisa Lamantia, Boulder Hill Drive. So obviously I'm new to all of this and new to Shelburne, and this is my very first meeting to attend, and I'm taking it all in, and I've read tons of stuff on Front Porch Forum, I've read articles, thought, no way, can it really be described as how people say it is, at these meetings? And I've been sitting here, and I've been watching, and I've been taking it all in. And what I've seen are people's faces and reactions at the front table to things that they agree with, disagree with, and so forth. Talking about how we can move forward and move on. Respect. And finding a way to hear the things that you might not always agree with, perhaps brushing it aside a little bit. You all have these faces that are telling me so many stories about what you think. You're shaking your heads at various points. People out here are doing it too. I'm seeing it and I'm taking it all in. And then I'm thinking, is this the town that we, moved to and want to be a part of? I don't think so. Now, my daughter is 10. I want to raise her here. in a place that we're proud to call our home. Obviously, y'all know we've moved around quite a bit. We bought a home here. We're homeowners here. We plan to stay here and have this be our forever home. But this is not sort of what I had pictured in this like quaint picture of Shelburne. I don't know what the answer is, but watching people's faces tonight, that's not the answer. The animosity, you got to find a way to end it. I don't know how to move on or what to do, but it's just my thoughts.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, I think everybody's spoken. Now let's move on to,
Lisa, let's make a pact. In late February, you and I are going to exchange. Okay?
Is that your ball there?
no, I think he's speaking,
This is the Red Sox ball.
that is Jerry's. Why? I don't think he was talking about the baseball. I think he was talking about your role in the DRB and his on the select board.
Yeah.
She was gonna say if you're a Red Sox fan, she'll sit at your seat.
Oh.
No, we're going to change it to a hockey club. And
Okay, the Kings? Oh, the Canadians, okay. All right, our next item is item number 13. Could you, please? Item 13, discuss budget narratives, priorities, and strategy. Joe?
Yep, okay, I'm gonna pass around, so I apologize. I'm working on one of these budget binders for all the select board members. So this, what I'm gonna pass to you is the narratives from department heads. I will post these online. If people wanna go through them. About what a 3% increase, decrease, or a level funded budget would mean. So I can, if board members don't want to take these back and study them, I can just keep them for your books that will come
Okay.
next week or something, so you can hand them back.
I'll
People
read-
who want to
Hand
look at
So
them.
we don't waste paper.
Right, so, either now or over the next 2 weeks, we're putting together an initial budget presentation for the next select board meeting.
Excuse me, could you please keep it down a bit? It's hard to hear.
For the next select board meeting, so, I don't need necessarily your input now from the board, but if you have some suggestions about things that are important to you or not, obviously, it doesn't need to be part of December 12th. We have a long time to work through the budget, but certainly let me know. This is the start of a iterative process, and, we'll continue. So, I don't know if there's any other questions about that, or?
When do you think the book would be, I mean, that's the question is,
The
do I keep
booklet
it
won't
or
be,
give it back to you?
well, I mean, sorry, I mean.
We're not ready to give this back to you quite yet.
Yeah, no, if you want to look through it and study it and you have time over the next 2 weeks, I would recommend doing that. And then you can respond back. I mean, these booklets won't be done initially until December 12th, and then we'll keep adding two things, right?
All I'm saying
Changing
is,
things,
don't, don't add a duplicate of this into the books.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same here, yeah.
So you can look through some of the items that are put in there by department heads. And, we're gearing up to have a budget presentation to the board and to the public to kick things off at the next select board meeting. So there'll be a lot of work over the next 2 weeks, and then we will work through that over the months of December and January, and hopefully have a budget that people are happy enough with by the end of January.
Well, the collective bargaining agreement's certainly going to impact the police end of it, which is the largest ticket item in our budget.
At least it's a known quantity, I suppose, at this point, instead of guessing. Anyways, we'll keep talking. Things that are important to the board. Let me know. Shoot me emails of items that you, want to have considered, and we'll make sure that we talk about it.
Okay, anyone have any comments for Joe or suggestions? The budget belongs to Joe during the first phase, and then it gets turned over to the select board at a certain time. And that's how the process is.
Yeah, and just to be clear, by the town charter,
I think it's December 31st, isn't it?
well, the town charter says the town manager shall provide a budget in whatever form the select board wants 45 days in advance of the annual meeting, which would actually put it somewhere mid to late January. But I have made the point of delivering the select board a complete budget by the new year, so that the month of January, you can make any final tweaks that you see necessary. But my goal has been to get that in your hands, 3 weeks in advance of the deadline.
I will tell you, since you've come on board, there's been a market change in the budget process, and it's been moved forward about approximately a full month, which has been quite helpful. And there's also been a new change, I think it started 2 years ago, I could be off by a year, where rather than having every meeting, department people and committees come in and talk to us for a while, we've structured it all for one day, and it seems to be quite helpful. It keeps us focused on understanding what one item is as compared to another item, and staff apparently is quite happy with that new way of doing things. And that, in case anybody's interested in going, it's basically an all-day session, and I think it's December 14th.
That's right.
It's held here.
Yeah, well, I was going to bring that up at the town manager's report, so we can either wait or we can talk about it now. So the last,
we'll just wait.
Why don't we?
Okay.
The only point I'll wait until the town manager's report, because I want to make sure we're clear on the schedule. That's
Okay.
all. But yes, the all-day budget meeting will be in the middle of December.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments from anyone? All right, next is item 14, consider a request for a waiver of a tax penalty late fee of $127.06 at 39 Heather Lane. Joe, you want to tell us about this? Usually Peter's here, but...
Yeah, and that's issue with, sorry, I don't have that right in front of me. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
All right, so I wasn't expecting Peter not to be here. Certainly only a significant event would keep Peter away, so you probably can realize it's a significant event. But the select board by the charter is the body that has the authority to waive penalty and interest fees to property tax payers. So here's one that has come in. Just putting it out there, Josh, you've mentioned a few times about developing a matrix for the board to
How's that coming?
utilize this. So I think I reached out to you a few months ago to see if you wanted to develop it. I don't know.
Have you made any
A lot of
progress on
other
that?
things
I've
have.
thought about it, and I've looked into other ways other places have done it.
Do you have any suggestions for us?
No, not at the moment.
What's the matrix? Can you just...
Oh, it's just, what
Sorry,
are the...
we kind of interrupted Joe.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna, so, anyhow, the select board by the charter, I think Josh was gonna come up with some sort of, I'm gonna call it a procedure or matrix to make the very broad authority of the board, which just says you have the authority to do this, not giving you any guidance of why you would decide to or why you would not waive a penalty.
A policy.
Right, and historically, the board has kind of developed a practice, whether it's, if for a military deployment, obviously, if there's a death in the immediate family, yes, but then other things weren't necessary. But that was just kind of a practice that was built up over time. Josh was suggesting, hey, why don't we come up with a more defined scope besides this broad, hey, you can do it for whatever reason. Hey, a lot of things are going on, I get it. So that hasn't been developed. I don't know what to tell the board for whether or not to approve this or not, besides it's strictly under your authority to do that or not.
I can tell you from precedent position, what we've done in the past. In my 9 years on the board, Joe is correct. Those are the two primary reasons why we waive a penalty, and that he's correct. It is having to do with the military deployment when someone's not in the area, or with a death. We have, and board members, that was pretty standard for probably the first 7 years I was on this board. And then over the last 2 years, there's been some movement. So in this case, we have someone, into public records, we have someone who is being treated for prostate cancer. So it doesn't meet those two criteria that we've done in the past, but I'm not saying this isn't a legitimate reason.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what I remember Peter saying, that I thought a significant illness was also one of those things that in the past there had been. And that is one of the things that I wanted to sit down with Peter and sort of get a list of all the things that he could remember that have been used.
I mean, it's important, I think, for a board to be consistent in its decisions. So,
It seems to me the thing to keep our eye on here is that it's a late payment and not by too many days. We've considered payments that had not been made and people were trying to recover, or extremely much delayed through probate and other conditions. I thought drew a line in the winter over questions. In one case, a check was mailed. There was clear evidence that it had been written. It was traced. It never arrived. There was a clear path of almost evidentiary sort that the people had, in good faith, written a certain check and it had not been received. And at the point, actually, that we debated this, the check was still not received. A second one had long since been sent. We held up, however, on the case of someone else who was late because they were returning from a family trip, a family emergency.
Right.
So lines have been drawn, the whole categories have not been accepted. And it seems to me this is a category being accepted that could be quite expansive. And in that case, I think my reaction to this is to bear in mind the tax burden that everyone else is paying on time.
all right, Joe, by any chance, is the person making the request here tonight to speak?
I believe so. Well, I mean, I don't know who, I don't know David.
Okay, just wanted to give that person an opportunity. I think you make a good point, Jerry. Anyone else on the board want to speak on it?
I go back to the thing, and I think I agree with Jerry. I mean, it's really difficult to, and this is what I felt and why I made the suggestion. It's really difficult to work in a nebulous vacuum. I'm not sure that's the best way to term this, but it's sort of in this open-ended, what are the implications of all of this? And so I'm not in the position of trying to make precedents now, but I will make some more progress on trying to come up with a matrix. I will sit down with Peter, if that's okay with you, and get his thoughts on the implications of these things. But I think
we've worked together.
and
I'll help with it.
right.
Well, I'm a little embarrassed that was a year ago.
No, I don't think it was that. No, it wasn't
I mean,
that.
matrix or no matrix, I'm not saying that's not a reasonable idea. It's still, the charter is kind of nebulous. It just gives you broad
exactly.
authority
Yeah.
to do it or not do it without any more direction than that.
We ought to
So-
be able to fashion a policy that at least cuts it down 90% of the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, and that's
And
all
if
I
it leaves
would-
a 10% always to be discussed on individual cases, I'd be okay with that. But we're flying blind here altogether, and some of us are newer than not and won't have an appreciation for precedent either, nor memory of past events. So
Chris, you've been you were on the board 150 years ago or something like that. Was that the same general idea for you guys? You waived it for death or military deployment, and was there anything else, or is it too hard to remember?
Well, death and military deployment, obviously, but also looked at past history. Were they repeatedly coming back? Had they been back twice? What were the circumstances why they'd been late before, if they'd been late, and if it was only once? So looking at the whole thing and trying to apply a little common sense to it. Unfortunately, that seems to escape us sometimes, but,
We just want to be,
yeah.
I think we just want to be fair.
And in all honesty, I think there was a case where somebody had been in being treated for an illness and just couldn't get back. I even recall a case where someone was on a business trip and was snowed in and couldn't get back.
Yes, you know, this is what we have right now is a one-page, 3-paragraph note. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say they couldn't have come back. It would have been great to have the person here
So you can ask
we
more
could probe a
questions.
little bit
Yeah.
to ask those questions, but they're not here. So
Something to throw out, and it kind of sways a little bit, but it ties to this. It was discussed before when I was on the board, how do we get more participation from the public? Or in this case, somebody who can't be here, because board members have a chance to call in. There should be a dedicated line where somebody in this kind of a scenario can call in and explain themselves if they can't be here in person.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
good. All right, would someone like to make a motion to waive the tax penalty late fee of $127.06 at 39 Heather Lane?
Well, I'll make the motion.
Okay, make the motion. Is there a second? Doesn't mean you're voting for it.
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Any further discussion by anyone? All in favor? Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
All right. Item 15. It's 10:37.
We can put this.
Let's push this. If everybody on the board's good with it, can we push this over to the next meeting?
It's fine with me too.
Okay, good. Item
So we can get to
16, public comments for items not on the agenda. Well, I'm hoping, since no one had any comments at the beginning, that no one has comments now, but does anybody? Okay, no one? Okay, next is select board comments. I almost never go first, I'll just go first. I just want to give a shout out to the Boy Scouts, Rick Bissett, and the Shelburne News for covering the story. Our Boy Scouts, there was a very nice article about the Boy Scouts and about Rick's programs as poet laureate. I reached out to Troop Master Jim Brannion, and I know that Jerry also did, and perhaps other people did. The Shelburne News made clear that our Boy Scouts here have done remarkable work over the years to not only foster an environment of growth pursuant to the Boy Scout tenets, but to assist the town in real projects that have assisted us in great part. And so I reached out to Jim and asked him if he wanted to be included as an agenda item in the future so that we could publicly recognize the Boy Scouts, and he enthusiastically responded yes. And I think Jerry, if it's fair to say, joins in on that, and perhaps others do. So, Joe, I would ask that you reach out to Jim, if the other board members agree, to find out when it would be good. And I'd like to leave enough time so that any scout or the person who's assisted the scout, because there's usually an adult who helps that scout, have an opportunity to get up and talk a bit about what they've done. If they have any pictures to show. I mean, we've had bridges done. It's saved the town a lot of money and served to help a lot of residents over and over again. Look at the shack right out there. Mike Major's son was involved in that. Former board member John Kerr was a big part of the Boy Scouts. Jim Brannion, heck, he was our Volunteer of the Year last year, the recipient of the Colleen Haig Award. So I want to give a shout out to him, and I want to give a shout out to Rick Bissett, who it was a great idea by Joe. And I remember when he called me, if I'd embrace it, which was yes, and then the entire board did, to start a poet laureate program. And Rick Bissett has taken this program to such a greater level than I think anyone anticipated, and he's involved in schools, he does readings, he has appeared before this board, he has really done an incredible job, and I thank the Shelburne News for those two stories, which I thought were covered quite well and showed a lot of appreciation for what the true Jim Branyan and Rick have meant to the town. So those are my comments. So, and thank you to the Shelburne News.
And we had a real quick one also about an article that appeared in the news, and that's our own Pulitzer candidate, Colleen Haig, who wrote a beautiful piece, I thought, about the retirement of Mike. It's really nice, very, very personal and warm, and quoted lots of fellow workers and gave a pretty good idea of what Mike was all about and what he was heading to and what we were losing. So any of you who if you would, as I did, encourage Colleen for more articles like that, given her vast knowledge of the town and events and buildings and people and whatnot, to not necessarily to in any way replace or crowd Mike, but that was really nice to read.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I guess all I can say is repeat what I've said before, is express my appreciation of the people who take the time to come to meetings and provide input, because I think it's a really valuable thing to have input from the citizens as to what's going on, what's being felt, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, doesn't matter. I think just the fact that people are here, and I hope I guess we lost somebody. Chris had made we had talked about in the past about other mechanisms for people to be able to contribute to select board meetings, and I hope that's something we can move forward for in the future. But once again, I just think your participation really adds a whole new dimension, not a new or a different dimension to our discussions.
I second your sentiment. It takes a lot of courage to pick up that mic, so I applaud you for doing that. And I look forward to seeing everybody at the tree lighting on Friday. That's my only other comment.
Okay. All right.
I think Sean had
Sean Moran, I'd like to make a comment on something. So I've met with some of you. I have scheduled meetings with some other. I have nothing against anybody on this board. Chair, you often say that you feel personally attacked. We only attacked the board and the chair in the positions they sit in. It's not a personal thing. I think you are damn lucky to have concerned citizens sitting in these chairs and watching your every move. We put you there. We want you to do what's best for the town. Sometimes we think you do, sometimes we think you don't. Has nothing to do with your personalities. I know some of you socially. Gary, we've met socially, and we're going to meet socially again on Friday.
No, we're not.
Oh, well, okay.
I'm not going to be here.
Oh, well, that's too bad. It'll be a nice party. But, you're a litigator. I'm sure you got to have a thick skin about this stuff. You sit on the board.
I sit on the board, but there are personal attacks.
You're taking this personal. I'm trying to tell you.
I've heard you make comments about the color of my shirt. Now, how could that be anything but a personal attack?
If you heard that, I'm sorry, but I don't remember making the color of your shirt. But if it's on camera, I'll admit to it. So anyhow, that's given in the spirit of Josh's comment. Thank you.
Okay, town manager's report.
Okay, real quick. I noticed, and it's all the same to me. I'm here, but I think I meant when I originally did this agenda that December 14th last year, the all-day budget meeting was a Wednesday. This year, it's on Thursday. it all the same to you, or, I mean, I think that we could, I think I had Wednesday in my mind, but I wrote down a date that's a Thursday.
So you're seeing if we're available to change it to,
To me, it's the same. I'm here.
Wednesday would be better.
So if
Well,
I think Wednesday is typically,
I'll tell you, I could do either day, but to be fair to Colleen, you know, she has a work schedule also.
I think
and-
for her, Wednesday is
Okay, if,
preferred, yes.
are you guys, does it make any difference to you?
I'd have to look at my
I
calendar.
say that, my phone's home, so.
Okay, tell you
Can
what,
you
why
check
don't we
on
do
that?
this? Could everyone check in? You already have my response and Jamie's response. that
Maybe the
we're-
13th, you're saying?
We're
The
available
13th,
both days.
That's the Wednesday. If you can get
prefer
that to
the
me
13th.
tomorrow, just so I can clarify with all the people who need to
I'll let you
come
know.
and make that known publicly, that'd be great. It's not the end of the world either way, but the 13th would be a little bit better, and that's what I was meaning to do when I put this schedule together, but put down the wrong date. All right, so then maybe, I don't know, before Christmas, sorry, I should say the holiday season, Gary mentioned Jim Brangan and the Colleen Haig Award. The select board should think about the manner in which we're going to award that, or that we're going to advertise for that, you know, shortly after the holiday. So I just want to make sure the board is on board with the manner that we're going to do that this year. So that's a select board decision, but I want to put that in the hopper, because I think that is a nice event, and
It is a nice event. I thought
you know,
it was very
and
well
I think-
received at town meeting.
and I
last
think
year.
that there's, I've even thought of ways that might make the kind of future nomination or selection process kind of interesting, but we can talk about that. I just want to make sure that that's something that we keep doing. All right, that's all I have.
All right, so our next item is, in regard to this item, before we do a motion, this is our item considering entering executive session to discuss certain things. One of the items involves, and I don't remember his first name, Mr. Burris. And I just want everyone to know that Mr. Burris contacted me, and if I remember correctly, I think it was by a voicemail, but I did not respond to him because I reached out to Joe because I didn't even know what it was about, and the message made it clear that there could be some type of litigation involved with the town, and I did not want to speak with him privately. So Joe sent him an email letting him know, and if I'm not characterizing it right, letting him know that I would not be returning the call or his email, however he contacted me, and because it would have put us in a difficult position.
Yeah, I
to speak
and I
with
think
him.
I was just clear when I emailed, and I'm blanking on his name now too, which is unfortunate because I've been talking to him a few times, that, you know, no individual member of the select board was in a position to talk to him directly about this matter, so he should.
I just want everybody to know he reached out to me. You know, it's a disclosure. That's all it is. And I had no conversation with him. All right, so
Can I? Okay, go ahead.
since we're going to talk about going to executive session to discuss litigation regarding some of these issues, it's a two-part motion. First, I'd entertain a motion to make a finding that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage in regard to zoning issues involving Halverson, Saar, and Burris.
So moved.
Moved by Jerry. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a question. When I looked at this and it said discuss zoning issues, that didn't give me very much information.
There's
And
a colon afterwards.
there's a call-in.
Colon.
Colon.
Zoning issues regarding Halverson,
Right,
Saar, and Burris.
and so my first thought is, okay, in the open meetings law, there are very distinct exemptions for discussion. Zoning is not one of them.
In every instance, there's a filing in environmental court.
Which is why I mentioned litigation.
And that's fine. And that's all I wanted to clarify, is that, and I think if we put on the agenda that we're going to go into executive session, it should be very clear as to what the exemption in the open meeting law applies to allow us to do that.
It's a fair point. I agree with you.
Okay. I agree with you too. And that's why I said what I said, because it made it clear it was litigation.
Well, it was just about Burris, so that's why I was just trying to.
Next time, I'll make sure that I am more clear on the agenda. That's a fair point.
Okay, any discussion? Further discussion?
Okay, are we doing this for each of these three items, or?
I did it for all three at once.
Okay.
Why, do you want to do them one at a time?
Well, no, I mean, if you can explain, okay, what is the exemption for number 2 then?
Oh, all the same. But all three of those, there's filings in environmental court. So
For
it's-
the hillside sewer issue?
Oh, I thought we took that out. We took that.
Oh, is that one, is that the one? I'm sorry, I
We
crossed
took-
the wrong thing
We
out.
took that and.
So let me be more clear, Josh, since you asked the exact exemption. It's 1 VSA, section 313A, 1E.
Yes, I have that. Right, I have it right
Okay,
here.
well, you asked, so
I'm just saying.
I'm giving
that-
you your answer, Josh.
No, but,
We're saying the same thing, right?
what?
We're saying the same
We're
thing.
saying the same thing. I mean, if we've eliminated number 2, and we said, are we eliminating number 3, that got eliminated as well, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, great, then that's fine. So we're
there's-
only dealing with item 1.
Is there any further
Can I repeat
discussion?
my motion?
I think we have it, but, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry.
Okay, I think that was unanimous. Next, I entertain a motion to enter executive session and invite the town manager under the provisions of 1 VSA 313 to discuss litigation involving zoning issues relating to Halverson, Saar, and Burris.
So moved.
Moved by Jerry. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, just, Joe?
Thank you, Jamie.
I don't know the status of any of these litigations, but just so we can tell our wonderful guy from VCAM, is there any chance we're going to be coming back? There is a chance.
Yeah, I wouldn't discount that.
You wouldn't discount it? All right, sorry, can't give you more. He wants to know. 32.
5 minutes or half hour?
Well, it's
10
7
minutes.
minutes to 11. I'm hoping it's.
I'll say 10 or 15.
Before Wednesday.
Okay, reconvene the, what day is today? November 28th Select Board meeting. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Jerry.
Wait. I'm sorry, then do we have to move to end executive session?
No.
Yes.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
To adjourn or?
To adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn.
But I thought we had to end, okay, we can have that motion.
Second.
Second. Any discussion?
Yeah, I think we need to have a motion to end executive session before we adjourn.
Okay.
Fine with that as well. If I don't know what the practice has been with closing executive session, but
No,
The practice
this
is different
Yeah.
from what I do. But anyway, this motion was to adjourn.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay.